I've actually got a headache now that I think about it, Adriana sighed, rolling over onto her back and stretching again. When she sighed and looked back up at him, his gaze was on her stomach. She glanced down, wondering if she was bigger than she'd been before, but no, she was still pregnant but not quite showing yet, so why was he looking? Do you want a boy or a girl? The question surprised her. Adriana met his eyes quizzically, finding a small smile on his lips. She breathed a laugh again and shook her head. I don't know. I think I've always imagined it being a boy. Eric smiled wider, head resting against his open palm. But I'd be fine either way. I can see a little you running around this time next year. Eric murmured, dragging his fingers up and down her wrist. Such a small touch to have her rapt attention. Smiling, Adriana twisted onto her side to lean onto her arm. I guess we'll see. Yup, Eric agreed, his smile faltering. He twisted a strand of her hair around his fingers carefully, almost as if it would break. Adriana wondered why he suddenly looked so melancholy. What's wrong? Nothing. Eric shook his head. You guys just scared me, that's all. She frowned, the day before's events playing through her head once again. Yeah. I'm sorry. Don't be. It's not your fault. Eric swiftly pressed a kiss to the back of her hand. Maybe after this we can start over now. Maybe people will take a hint that you're not to be mistreated. Adriana scoffed. Because the rest of the archipelago has learned from the mistakes of others. I know, but your dad has upped security. You're not going anywhere without a guard, plus me or Cliff. Great. Adriana sighed, blowing a hair out of her eyes. Now I get babysitters. Eric frowned. Well, can you blame him? Of course not, Adriana replied, smoothing a wrinkle out of his shirt. She hid a smirk when he looked down to watch her hand on his chest. Respectful he may be, he was still a man after all. Eric liked to be touched, too. She twisted one of the buttons at his collar as she thought, trying to return her thoughts back to the topic at hand. It will be fun to have my own little entourage. Eric looked back up at her. Oh, Finn will have his own too. Once he's allowed to leave. Yeah. Adriana frowned, dropping her hand to rest on his arm. She ignored the suspicious narrowing of his eyes when she traced circles around his bicep. How is Finn? Eric swallowed, but shrugged. I haven't heard anything in a while. Maybe we should go ask. Yes, Adriana slid to a sitting position, even while he stood and stretched. The edge of his shirt rode up to reveal his stomach and, grinning, Adriana couldn't resist poking him right above his belly button. Gee. Eric jumped back, arms wrapped around his middle. None of that now, this is serious. Adriana giggled and pulled open the already cracked door. By the time she opened the door to her brother's room, her smile and humor had evaporated. Astrid sat at the edge of Finn's bed, just as Eric had been. Her dad was passed out in a second chair nearby, a blanket tucked around him up to his chin. She smiled wanly even as she stepped closer to her mom and took in her brother's condition. Finn was breathing evenly, but his skin seemed pale and clammy. He was shirtless except for thick white cloths wrapped around his torso and a few thick blankets. She gently rested the back of her hand to his cheek and winced. He's warm. That's normal, Astrid said tiredly. As long as he doesn't get a fever. He looks better than I did, Eric murmured. Adriana glanced at him, remembering those long nights staying by his side with his leg injury. As if on cue, his prosthetic squeaked when he moved to pull Astrid's blanket back over her shoulders. She smiled up at him gratefully. Did he wake up at all? Adriana asked. A few hours ago, Astrid said, a small smile on her face. He was a little disoriented, but he was really worried about you. Adriana smiled, pulling his blanket up farther. Daddy said last week that even if he can be a jerk sometimes, Finn would do anything for me. I didn't believe him after all the arguments we've had. But now I understand what he meant. Astrid put an arm around her waist in a side hug. He never stopped caring. He just has a hard time showing it sometimes with that big stubborn brain. Adriana and Eric laughed a little. Before anyone could comment further, a strangled whine from outside made them jump. What was? Adriana asked, turning toward the window in time to see a blue and green mass hurtle past. Aru! The sound of claws on the front door made them simper. Zap! Astrid murmured, glancing sadly at Finn. She must have gotten out of her pen. Aru! More scratching sounds at the door. Hiccup stirred, instantly sitting up and rubbing his face. Gotta get Zap. No, it's okay, Hiccup, Eric said, already heading out the door. I'll get her. Adriana smiled after him, grateful for his constant support. He'd sat with her all night and was going out of his way to help her parents. He truly was the best friend she could ever hope for. I'll go help, she said quietly, stepping out of the room. Adri, it's cold outside, you should stay in. Astrid stood. I'll be right back in, I promise. Maybe I can help calm her down. All right. Adriana stepped outside to see Eric talking to Zap. The shockjaw kept whining and backing away from him, prancing in front of the healers. She straightened when she saw Adriana and tried to nose past the young man. No, wait, Zap. Eric pushed against her shoulder, but the dragon wouldn't budge. Zappy. Adriana crooned, holding out her hands. The shockjaw sniffed her up and down, checking her favorite girl out for injuries. She even nuzzled her stomach for a moment before trying to push past her to the door. No, Zap. Adriana said, helping Eric to keep her away from the door. You can't go inside. The shockjaw tossed her head with an indignant growl. You can't, he's sleeping. Adriana insisted. Aoo. Sure. Eric hushed her gently. It's okay, he'll be okay. Zap's wings shimmered with pent-up electricity as she hopped back, whining. Adriana's eyes burned. She'd never seen the dragon act this way. Then again, she'd never been separated from Finn for more than a few hours before. Zap. Finn's okay. He'll be okay. Zap howled and practically threw herself into the dirt, curling up into a ball and turning away from them. Eric and Adriana blinked at each other, surprised by the cold treatment. Adriana crept closer and gently rubbed the dragon's scales behind her ears, careful of her electrified wings mere inches away. But she knew the dragon wouldn't intentionally hurt her. She was only mourning, just like they were. It's okay, Zappy, Adriana murmured. Finn will be okay. The shockjaw didn't move or reply. She merely wrapped her tail around herself and stared at the window that led into Finn's room. Eric slid his hands onto her shoulders. Annie, you should go back inside. Adriana felt terrible for the dragon, but knew there was nothing else that she could do for her. Maybe her dad would know, being the dragon master and all. Silently she stood and allowed Eric to lead her back inside just as Mara came down the stairs. What are you doing out of bed? And outside? Mara pointed to her room with a stiff finger. Off you go. Adriana obeyed, smiling when she heard Mara telling Eric that she thought with all his coddling last night, how he allowed her to get past him. Adriana climbed into bed with a sigh, content to wrap herself in blankets and lay around all day. Maybe Eric could run to her house and bring her a book or something. The soft pitter-patter of rain against the window grabbed her attention and she frowned, feeling terrible that her brother's dragon was sitting in the rain, waiting for her boy to come outside and play like he did every morning. Eric, Adriana moaned, would you still love me if I threw up right now? Why wouldn't I? Eric chuckled, rubbing her back while she hovered over a bucket. Because girls are supposed to be cute and pretty and not gross and pukey. She mumbled, wiping her mouth and moving the bucket far away. I'll understand if you want to flee from me and find someone sexier. What if I find puking sexy? He winked at her. Then I must be the sexiest woman alive. Adriana moaned. You don't have to be here. This was true. Adriana had told him he could go home and get some real rest, but he insisted on staying. Besides, they were still waiting for Finn to wake up. After all, if they were married, he wouldn't have an excuse to leave. He didn't want to leave her whether they were single or married. Well, not that this was practicing, was it? The thought made Eric's head spin a bit. I am happy to serve you any way you need. Can you have this baby for me? Eric laughed. I wish, but I'm afraid my talents don't stretch that far. Adriana huffed and flopped back onto the bed with a huff, curling up onto her side with a pout. Her eyes fluttered shut when another bout of wooziness hit her. "I hate this." He simpered and gently brushed her hair back away from her neck. "I'm sorry. It will be worth it one day." He bent down and gently kissed her forehead. "Home." Adriana sighed, eyes still closed and seemingly boneless under his touch. Eric swallowed, still brushing her hair back. How many years had he thought about doing this? How long did he wonder if he'd ever have the opportunity? He'd always had some kind of fixation on her hair, though he could never understand why. He'd never seen Brandine hold her like she was special. He'd never seen him give her a gift that she really wanted, and he'd never heard Brandine tell her just how special she was. Not that their relationship was completely false and not that he thought Brandine was always a scumbag. Who knows why he decided to take the route he did? Eric didn't particularly care, he'd kill the guy the next time they crossed paths. But since Eric first realized his feelings, all he wanted to do was make her happy. He knew he'd fail and she'd fail him sometimes. They weren't perfect. But he knew who she was and how she felt, he knew everything about her just as she knew everything about him. Nothing made him happier than seeing her smile and be truly happy. She'd been through so much. He was determined more than ever to make her happy. Adriana Haddock's life would be miserable no longer. Eric trailed his fingertips down her neck and she exhaled slowly with a contented hum. He didn't know what he was doing, but apparently it was helping her relax and ease her discomfort. When the door suddenly opened, Eric retracted his hand, almost afraid of the expression Hiccup would give him if he saw them so close and him touching her. Not that he thought he was doing anything wrong, but after Brandine, and now Cale, Joel and Free, Eric doubted the chief wanted anyone touching his daughter. Eric was shocked to see his mother walk in the room. Her brow pinched when Adriana groaned and sat up, muttering under her breath at the disruption. She too looked at the woman in surprise. "Hi Mom." Eric hedged carefully. "Eric." Lara's expression smoothed over. She took a single step closer, turning her eyes to the blonde sitting on the bed. "Adriana. I wanted to apologize to both of you for my behavior these last weeks. It was not kind or mature for that matter, and I am sorry for believing the rumors." Lara sighed. "I tend to take people at their word and not investigate further. I should have spoken to you, Eric, instead of assaulting you. I am sorry." Eric wanted to be angry for the slap she'd dealt him, but he couldn't find it in himself to remain angry. The fact alone that his mother was willing to apologize to both of them face to face was good. She was willing to admit she was wrong. He couldn't ask for more. "I forgive you, Mom," Eric said. Adriana swallowed and finally reached out a hand. "Can we start over?" Lara smiled ever so slightly before taking the girl's hand in her own. In all the years of their friendship, Eric couldn't remember a time when his mother had held Adriana's hand. "I'd like that, dear. Especially if things start to progress." She smiled knowingly at her son. Eric smiled sheepishly at the Adriana, feeling a blush warm his cheeks. Dropping Adriana's hand, his mother sighed. "We'll have to discuss things with the family, at least to clear the air. Nicholas needs to apologize as well." Frowning, he stared up at her. "Nicholas? For what?" "Well, he's the one who told me that you two." Lara waved a hand in the air. "Well, it doesn't matter." Eric's heart leaped in his chest, a fire he didn't usually feel burning in his veins. He slowly stood, his prosthetic squeaking. "No." "What did he say?" Lara held his eyes and didn't reply. He could see that she didn't want the family to have any more issues, that she wished she could take back the words she'd already begun to say. But he was smart enough to figure out what she was withholding. Now he knew just who'd started the rumors. Adriana gently grabbed his hand and squeezed. "Eric, it's fine," she murmured, trying to pull him back into his chair. "Just ignore it." "No," Eric said quietly. "I can't let this one go." He released her hand and breezed past his mother, both females sputtering behind him. "I'll be back in a bit, Annie." Lara followed him out the door. "Eric, don't do anything stupid." Eric whirled on her, aware of the chief and Mara talking quietly nearby. Their conversation died when they saw the Larsons. Mom, I've put up with his garbage my entire life. I've sat back, I've let it go, I've ignored it. I've even forgiven him. But this, Eric shook his head angrily. There is no coming back from this. With that, he turned and stalked out the door, leaving his mother standing in the heelers. He was halfway across the square when he heard jogging steps behind him. Eric. Hiccup grabbed his arm, which he roughly jerked out of his grasp. What's going on? You should be with Finn. Eric snapped, incensed. Not when you look like you're going to kill someone, Hiccup replied calmly. What's wrong? You can't stop this one, Chief. Eric growled. Come along if you want, but I'm not stopping until I say what I have to say. At least tell me where we're going. No. With a sigh, the chief followed him. Eric didn't care how rash he was being, he didn't care if the chief didn't want any more bad things going on. He'd decided to follow, and if he wouldn't turn back, then he'd have to watch the show. But Eric didn't plan to deal any blows. He just wanted to know why. His older brother worked at the fishery, which was just down the road from the square. Eric descended the steps quickly, the step thunk of his gait matching the chief's as he followed close behind. Eric heard the talking and laughter of the local fishermen in the hut before he saw them. He marched into the belly of the room, surrounded by large basins of fish and nets. The men's conversation died down when they saw their chief walk in. Chief, a tall man, strode forward, holding out a hand. Good to see you. How's your son? He's all right, Jarvis, Hiccup said. Eric ignored their pleasantries, eyes scanning the room for his brother. Where's Nicholas? The dark-haired man raised an eyebrow at the demand, but calmly pointed up the stairs. He's up there gathering some nets. What's going on? Eric was already halfway up the ladder. He vaguely registered Hiccup telling the men to let him go, but he ignored everything else when he reached the top and saw his brother returning with a handful of netting in his arms. Nicholas frowned, dark hair swept across his brow. What are you doing here? You're the one who started the rumor. Eric spat. His brother rolled his eyes. You really live for drama, don't you? Nicholas tried to push past, but Eric blocked his way. Get out of the way, Eric. No. Eric growled. Look me in the eye and tell me it wasn't you, and I will go away. Nicholas glared, saying nothing. Eric shook his head angrily. Why? I got my information right from the horse's mouth. What are you talking about? I heard your argument with Finn before they left to go find Adriana, after she took off. Nicholas sneered. I can't believe you. Eric snapped, ignoring the sound of Hiccup coming up the ladder behind him. That was a private conversation. It's not my fault you were so loud. No, you purposely listened in on our conversation and twisted the information that you had no business knowing. Eric yelled, stomping closer to his brother. You had no right. Hiccup stepped closer to them. Easy, Eric. We don't need to go to blows over this. Nicholas smirked. Yes, listen to the chief. Haven't you gotten in enough fights this year? Eric wanted nothing more than to punch his brother's teeth out right there, but obviously that would only prove them right. His body shook with rage, his heart ramming in his chest. Why would you do this to me? Eric demanded. You know I care about her. I'd never do that to her. Why would you go around the village and spread that kind of thing? It was stupid, I admit it. Nicholas snapped. Finn laid it all out. How else was I supposed to take it? Eric stepped in closer. Do you know what they do to people who eavesdrop on the airs? Hiccup frowned. Eric. Please, what are they going to do? It's not like it was over anything. Nicholas stopped. Both Eric and Hiccup glared at him. Want to finish that sentence? Hiccup breathed. Nicholas hung his head. No sir. No, Eric sneered. He doesn't have the guts. Nicholas tossed his head. At least I don't beat around the bush. You're the most wishy-washy person I've ever met. You want to hear it then? Fine. I love Adriana. I want to marry her someday. I care about her more than anything in this world, and I will not sit here and let you insult her. I would never say something about Mel to anybody. I respect her more, and I dare say I even respect you a little more than that. Hiccup rested a hand on Eric's shoulder, trying to push him back. Okay. Nicholas scoffed. So what about the kid? What do you know about raising kids? I don't see any kids running around your ankles. I hope it never happens because you'd be a terrible parent. Hiccup jerked. Eric. Hurt flashed in Nicholas's eyes. Eric didn't care. For once, his brother's hardened shell was breaking. You don't know anything, Eric. Nicholas said through grit teeth. You're just a stupid kid. You're right, I'm just a stupid kid. But at least I'm not a selfish jerk. Do not speak to me or my wife ever again. Nicholas sneered through grit teeth. Don't expect help from us on your next crisis because we won't be there. Eric scoffed, backing toward the stairs. Like I've ever needed you for anything. Guys, come on. Hiccup said, even as Eric stomped down the ladder and left his older brother in the loft. He pushed his way through the dead silent crowd of men and stomped back up the planks toward the village. He ducked between the nearest rows of houses and barns, his breathing accelerating in his anger. Finally, with a scream of rage, he turned and slammed his arm into a wall. Pain laced up his forearm, but he didn't care. At the last second he knew not to hit the wall directly with his hand. He didn't want to break it. He leaned against the wall, palms flat, angrily staring at the ground. A minute passed before he heard the step thunk in the grass. He heard nothing as Hiccup stood there and stared at him. Eric made no move to speak. He was sick of trying, tired of having a brother who cared nothing about the feelings and honor of others. He was done. You should not have said that. Eric's anger returned. I was standing up for Adriana. I'm not talking about that. Eric whirled around and faced the chief. Which part then? The part where I haven't needed him a day in my life. The part where you hope he never has children. Hiccup glared, patience wearing thin. It's true, he'd be the worst father. Mel just had a miscarriage, Eric. Eric stilled, the ire in his chest dimming. What? Hiccup stared back at him, green eyes hard. Guilt rose up in his chest. When? A couple of weeks ago. Eric bit his lip and shook his head. Another prime example of nobody telling me anything. Maybe they had a reason. There always is. Eric, knock it off. Hiccup finally snapped. I understand standing up for yourself and my daughter. I appreciate that. But do you know what it is like to lose a child? The pain in his voice made Eric pause. Astrid had once told him about their miscarriage, the pain they'd gone through. How crushed Hiccup had been. He shook his head. No. Then don't you ever say that to someone again. Hiccup said in a deadly quiet voice. Eric nodded, but couldn't help saying his next thought. I hope you understand that I can't apologize for it. He wouldn't hear it if I tried. Hiccup shrugged. I can't force you to do anything. You're both adults, you do what you feel is right. Just understand that I will do what is best for my daughter, who you suddenly seem so passionate about marrying. Eric froze. We haven't talked about anything specific. Outside of dating. Hiccup's eyes were narrowed to thin slits, his arms crossed tight across his chest. I was going to talk to you soon, but after everything yesterday. Eric sighed, rubbing his forehead. Honest. We haven't planned on hiding anything. Like we could if we tried. Oh, I know that. Hiccup muttered gruffly. Worry gnawed in the pit of his stomach. If he didn't have Hiccup's approval, then. Hiccup sighed heavily. Let's talk about this later. I want to check on Finn. He brushed past Eric and left him standing in the alley. Yeah. Me too. Eric muttered to himself before turning and following the chief back to the healers. Baba, Baba. Cliff hummed a random tune as he pounded on his work desk with a few pencils. My job is so boring. My job is so boring. My job is so. Cliff. Embarrassed, Cliff swiveled in his chair and grinned at his annoyed boss. Yes, Horst. Please stop. Okay. Cliff deflated. Literally, he deflated, his chin hitting his desk with a loud smack, his work tools clattering across the desk. Ow. Horst sighed from behind him. He could imagine his boss rubbing his eyes and pulling on his face like Eric did sometimes. Eric. Man, he missed his man, his broski. Life sucked when he was stuck in a horrid place such as this, with no one's ear to talk of, since Horst had literally threatened to tape his mouth shut before they even broke for lunch. He basically had no work to do. Even with Eric taking a few days off to help with Adriana and Finn, there was little work to do. Aunt Mara wouldn't let him inside the healers to see if Adriana and Finn were okay. He'd been told that Adriana would be released today sometime, but still, he wanted to know if Finn was okay. He wouldn't do anything stupid. He just wanted to make sure he wasn't dying. At least so he could tell Zap that he was okay. The poor dragon hadn't moved an inch all day. She'd been laying outside the window in the hot summer heat, unmovingly staring at the paned glass as if she was waiting for Finn to walk past at any second. Of course, he wouldn't. Per Hiccup's instructions, he'd gotten a few buckets of salt water to pour over the dragon's scales while he was on his lunch break. The dragon survived best in wet locations, and since she refused to fly or leave the healers, the chief was worried her scales would get too dry. That had been the most exciting part of his day. Sitting around doing nothing with nobody to talk to. He was bored and stressed and gradually getting more irritated as the day wore on. It was hot and muggy and his curly hair wouldn't stay out of his eyes, and dang it, if he had to stay silent for one more minute. All right Cliff, get out of here. Cliff nearly jumped out of his chair, almost toppling his desk. Really? Horst stood with a sigh. It's 1,000 degrees in here and we haven't had work in hours. Let's go home early, check on the haddocks. Sweet thanks Horst. Cliff didn't wait to hear a response. He bolted from the leather shop before Horst could change his mind. He ran to the healers and pounded on the door. Aunt Mara. Let me in. A muffled response, no, Cliff. Then I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house down. The door swung open to reveal his very tired, very irritated aunt. This is not a game, Cliff. I know that. Cliff said, throwing out his arms in his angst. I will wash my hands and arms, I'll do whatever you want. I won't even breathe for 10 whole minutes. I just want to see if he's okay. Please. Mara tightened her hold on the door. Cliff. I can't risk Finn getting any infection. Cliff sighed, completely crestfallen. He never cried, but he seriously wanted to cry. His aunt's shoulders dipped before she released the door. For a second he thought she was letting him in, but instead she wrapped him in a hug. I know you're worried about your friend, Cliff. Mara said, pulling back and holding eye contact. But he's more than just a friend. He's our future chief. Cliff nodded. He's been sleeping most of the day. He woke up early this morning but I wasn't there to talk to him. I need to know without a shadow of a doubt that he'll be alright before I allow visitors in. Do you understand? Yes. Alright. I will contact you when you can see him. Cliff sighed, rubbing his eyes roughly. Okay. Mara patted his arm before turning and closing the door, leaving him on the porch alone. Cliff sighed again and walked around the side of the house. He was surprised to see Hiccup there gently talking to Zap, who was pointedly ignoring the man. Toothless stood on her other side, rumbling at her sympathetically. Hey Chief. Hiccup glanced up at him. Hey Cliff. The chief held up a large fish in front of the Shockjaw's face. Come on, Zappy. You have to eat something. Zap stirred, but only to twist her face away from the fish. A low, sad moan rumbled in her throat as she stared at the window once more. Hiccup sighed and rubbed her scales. I know, girl. I know. Is he okay? Cliff asked tentatively, despite his aunt's words a mere minute ago. The look on Hiccup's face as he gently stroked Zap's snout nearly broke the teenager's heart. He's fighting a fever. Cliff felt like his chest might collapse in on itself. He didn't know what they'd do if Finn didn't, no. Finn would be okay. He was always okay in the end. Toothless leaned over her and pressed his nose against Zap's temple. Without warning, she twisted and lashed out against the night fury, wings shimmering with an electric pulse. Cliff gasped when Hiccup leaped away and shoved his body in front of Cliff. Toothless slowly backed away with his wings angled down, his head reclined toward the ground. Zap growled at him again and still the night fury backed away. "What's he doing?" Cliff breathed. "Asserting her dominance." Hiccup whispered back. Zap swiveled toward them and the chief tensed. No sudden moves. The shockjaw growled low in her throat at them. Nearly a minute passed before Zap finally snapped her jaws at them, curled up against the dirt and plopped back into her previous seat to stare at the window. Cliff swallowed hard. He'd never seen his friend's dragon act like that. Even though she'd gone back to pointedly ignoring them, he could still see the shimmer beneath her wings and the tenseness of her muscles. "Okay," Hiccup murmured. "Back away slowly." Cliff obeyed and within a few moments, they were a safe distance away. When they reached the front of Mara's house, they collectively sighed. A moment later Toothless joined them, shaking his thick hide. "You okay, bud?" Hiccup asked, inspecting his dragon's face. Toothless snorted and sniffed Cliff up and down as if to check for injuries. Once satisfied that the boy was unharmed, the Night Fury turned and stalked off, clearly finished with the situation. Cliff wiped his sweaty face on his sleeve. "I've never seen Zap so aggressive. All she cares about right now is Finn." Hiccup sighed. "Don't approach her anymore. I'll take care of her from now on." "What if she attacks you?" Cliff asked nervously. "She won't." "How do you know?" "If she wanted to attack us, she would have." Hiccup said patiently. "She's just afraid and angry." Cliff sighed, nodding in agreement. He stared sadly at the house. Zap wasn't the only one who wanted in. The chief seemed to notice his distress. "Finn will be okay." A stray curl dropped into Cliff's eyes and he tossed his head forcefully. "I hope so." "He will be." Hiccup turned and faced the rest of the village. "Why don't you find something fun to do?" Cliff frowned. "The people I usually hang out with are in there. Surely there's someone else out here who could use a little spontaneity." Hiccup smiled. Cliff looked around the village, eyes scanning the various people out and about at this hour. Nothing struck him as inspiring until he saw the seamstress's house and he brightened. "I do believe that there is someone else out there who could use a little spontaneity." He grinned at the chief before taking off down the street. "Thanks." He thought he heard a laugh from the chief as he left, but he kept moving toward Grandma Ingerman's house, now excited to see what fun was in store for him today. Taryn lifted the almost finished basket in her hands to inspect her work. With a grimace, she continued her weaving, sparing only a glance at Burke's head seamstress when she pointed out a flaw. "You must twist that section there, loop it down and under, there. A few more twists and your basket will be complete." Taryn chewed her lip as she worked, while Grandma Ingerman bustled about the room and inspected Morgan's work. The other girl hadn't been working at the seamstress's shop long, but the work seemed to keep the formerly frivolous girl in check. Taryn herself had taught the other girl sewing and had even given her some pointers in cooking. It was a little strange to hang out with Morgan, who used to be such a mean girl in the village, back when she dated Kale. Even before she'd dated Kale. But since their relationship had ended due to him cheating on her with Donna, Morgan had seemed to have taken a reality check and re-evaluated her friendships. Taryn held up her finished basket with a satisfied sigh. Her fingers were red from twisting the reeds most of the day, but she was proud of herself. Grandma Ingerman taught her many things: cooking, cleaning, baking, weaving, amongst other things. Initially her parents had gotten her the job with the seamstress because a young woman needed to be molded into the role of spouse and mother. While Taryn wanted those things very much, she'd been a bit put out by the idea when she was 13. She wished she could go out and play with all the other kids. She was tired of dresses and tight braids and uncomfortable boots. For once she wanted to let her hair down and just breathe. She'd adjusted into the role easier than she'd expected. Grandma Ingerman loved teaching young women and adored having them in her shop. She treated them as if they were her own daughters. The robust woman always had a smile on her face and put in a good word to everyone she met. She always offered good advice and made the best brownies in the archipelago. Even Finn couldn't refute that, and he made surprisingly good brownies. Morgan huffed and flopped back in her chair, eyeing Taryn's finished basket. How can you have finished that thing already? We've only been sitting here since lunch. Taryn set her basket beside her chair with a small smile. You're still learning. It's so pretty. Oh no, Taryn laughed, pushing hers underneath her chair behind her feet. It's terrible. It has plenty of flaws. Don't be ridiculous, you're good at everything you do. Morgan pouted. Taryn snorted. At least you know how to flirt with boys. Morgan rolled her eyes. Yeah. Such an admirable quality. Now, Miss Morgan, Grandma Ingerman said from her rocking chair, her fingers flying through her weaving even as she looked at the girls. You do too have many bright qualities. You're a lovely young woman, just as Taryn is. Any young man would be proud to have your hand. Morgan pursed her lips. I'm tired of boys. Taryn smiled at her sympathetically. The Ingerman matriarch sighed. Yes, I don't blame you. But keep your chin up, dear. Keep learning the trade and making new friends worth keeping. One day one of these boys will mature up and sweep you off your feet. I guarantee it. Morgan's lips quirked in a small smile. Taryn couldn't help smiling herself as she reached for a handful of reeds to start another basket. Footsteps sounded outside the door, then suddenly changed to a scuffle, followed by a body hitting the ground and the sound of baskets clattering against the porch. The girl snickered at the sound of a strangled yelp before the door swung open wide to reveal Cliff, who had a small basket on his head with the handle caught around his chin like a helmet. Ladies, I have arrived, Cliff proclaimed with arms open wide. He stepped inside and nearly tripped on the other basket stuck around his ankle. Morgan slumped with a loud whine. Oh Cliff. I just finished that one yesterday. Oh gods, I am so sorry. Cliff lifted his foot and scrabbled for the basket, hopping backwards and getting it stuck on his boot every time he pulled. I'll fix it, Wawara. The boy flew onto his back, landing amongst a pile of sewing materials. A loud crash sounded when all sorts of baskets of cloth and thread and newly weaved baskets crashed to the floor. Goodness. Grandma Ingerman hopped from her chair, weaving forgotten, and joined Taryn in aiding the boy to his feet. Are you all right, my boy? Oh yes. I'm fantabulous. Cliff grinned, yanking the basket off his foot at last. I have to say, that was so close. Taryn blinked and then snorted loudly, even as Morgan groaned. That was punny. I always told you I was a. Cliff wiggled his eyebrows, lifting the broken basket. Basket case. Grandma Ingerman joined Taryn in laughter. Morgan frowned. I'm going to sew your lips shut. Well, that wouldn't be very ice. Cliff said with wide eyes, pointing to a nearby jar of water with ice cubes floating at the rim. Oh, I'll show you ice. Morgan stomped to her feet. Now, Morgan, what do we ladies do when we're annoyed? Besides knock out stupid boys. Yes, besides knock out cute and adorable boys. Grandma Ingerman smiled as she hugged Cliff around the shoulders and held him close. Cliff gasped and flung his arms around the woman. I do love a good hug. Taryn covered her mouth with her hand to fight the wide grin. Cliff was such a goof and so much fun, and so unbelievably clumsy, she could hardly understand how he'd lived this long without obtaining any serious injuries. Morgan uncrossed her arms with a huff and walked away. Oh, never mind. I'll get a broom. Good idea, dear. Grandma Ingerman said, stepping back from Cliff and looking him up and down for injuries. What can I do for you, my boy? Ah well, Cliff began. I am in search of someone to share in an adventure. Taryn snorted when Grandma Ingerman gasped. Really now? Pray tell, who might you ask to join you on this grand adventure? Taryn began to pick up rolls of cloth and reorganized some of the baskets while they talked. Well, I thought I'd ask a certain auburn-haired girl who is a friend of mine. Oh, sounds like fun. I wonder what she'll say. I don't know, I guess we'll have to wait and see what she says. Taryn smiled, still picking up the mess of things around them, waiting to hear the rest of their conversation. The room was silent for a few moments before Cliff whispered, How long do you think it will take her to realize we were talking about her? Taryn blinked and turned back to them in surprise. Cliff and her boss were standing there with equally teasing smiles on their faces. Wait, me? Well yeah, cupcake, you're the only auburn-haired friend I have. Taryn raised an eyebrow. Cake. Yes, I just called you a cupcake. Cliff leaned in real close as if to share a secret. It's a term of endearment. Morgan scoffed nearby as she swept. Taryn blushed and turned away, fighting a smile. What kind of adventure would you like to embark on, Cliffster? Cliff smirked at the name. I dunno. Let's go hunting for trolls or hunt for seashells or raid the chief's terror house. Yeah, Eric did that once, I don't think we want to repeat that. Oh yeah, that's right. Marbrow used to be so adventuresome, before he got his head stuck up in the clouds full of fantasies of Adriana. Morgan muttered. Grandma Ingerman cleared her throat. Sorry. Anyway, I dunno, whatever you want to do. Cliff shrugged. I'll even challenge you to a chubby bunny contest if you want. Ah no thanks, Taryn winced. That's disgusting. Cliff's silver-grey eyes narrowed with challenge. One day, Taryn Brand, I will challenge you to a chubby bunny contest and you will partake in said contest. And win. Her boss crowed with laughter across the room, as if the idea amused her. It must have because her face flushed pink. I think my Taryn would much rather go starfish fishing, Cliffy. Oh good idea. Taryn paused in surprise. How does one go, starfish fishing? Cliff giggled in sudden excitement. Oh ho 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 ho, I will show you. As soon as you get off work. Which will be now. Grandma Ingerman promptly announced. Go on girls, you can have the rest of the day off. Morgan dropped the broom with a thankful sigh. Thank you. She quickly retrieved the broom and returned it to its rightful place. Wahoo! Cliff exclaimed. Our bosses are quite generous today. Oh but Grandma, are you sure? Taryn asked unsure, looking around the messy shop. Cliff glanced around at the mess sheepishly. You shouldn't have to clean up all by yourself. Dear, I've been cleaning homes my entire life, I don't mind doing it one more time. The old woman smiled and ushered the duo to the door, Morgan on their heels. Go on, have fun. To Taryn, she bent down and whispered in her ear, take advantage of good opportunities, dearie. This one's a keeper. Taryn blushed as the old woman pushed the trio off the porch and shooed them away to have grand adventures. Morgan bid them goodbye and promptly began walking away. You don't want to come? Cliff called after her. Morgan gave him a wan smile and shook her head. That's okay, Cliff. Thanks though. Cliff paused, then brightened. I'll bring you back a starfish, okay? The blonde smiled at his kindness and nodded once. Thanks. I'll look forward to it. Morgan turned and walked into the village, hands in her pockets and blonde curls bouncing on her shoulders as she went. Taryn turned a look up at him, her heart warm. He was so tall, Cliff had to nearly look down at her, but his smile was bright. That was nice of you. Yeah well, Cliff shrugged. She hasn't had it easy the last few months, what with Kale and everything. His tone was bitter. She could almost read his thoughts, as if he was thinking of Finn. Cliff shook himself and smiled again. Morgan deserves some kindness too. She's one of us now. Taryn smiled warmly and followed him down the path toward the outskirts of the village. She wondered at his words. Did he like Morgan? She didn't want to overthink things and overanalyze, but she had to wonder at least a little bit. Should she ask? Grandma Ingerman was always telling her to be brave and not be afraid to speak her mind, especially where boys were concerned. Boys could take every little thing at face value and get just as easily confused as girls, so a girl should never be afraid to speak her mind. She smirked when he purposely wove between barrels and nearly tripped over his own feet in the process. You're so clumsy. That I am. Cliff grinned, catching himself on a barrel before he face-planted. Life is more fun that way. Except when you spill coffee on your shirt. Hey, rude. Taryn snickered at his pout. I don't know why I was even drinking that. I don't even like coffee. Because Finn dared you to a drinking contest and we weren't yet 17, so coffee was the next best thing. Oh yeah. Cliff nodded. His thick brown curls bounced in every direction as he walked. The day's humidity seemed to make his hair stand taller usual. Where are we going? Taryn finally asked. Cliff smiled mischievously as he took a turn down the docks. She followed him down the planks and gazed at the open ocean for a moment, wondering where her little brother Alton might be. He'd been out traveling with Johan for most of the year and they hadn't received any terror mail from in quite some time. As Berk was the one of Johan's most important stops on his trade route, she knew they would come Berk soon. Turning back to Cliff, she smiled when he stopped at the fisheries shop, nearly throwing himself on the countertop in an outrageous pose. Gentlemen, I have a great and powerful need, and I am in need of your services, he proclaimed with a wild grin. Hello Cliff. The men of the fishery drawled without amusement. One reached over and tossed him a bag, which squelched on the countertop. Taryn's nose wrinkled. What is that? Cliff opened the pouch briefly to reveal several tiny fish. You. What are we going to do with that? I know it smells unsavory, but no worries. Would I really lead you astray? You did get trapped in the mountains with Eric once. Cliff rounded back to the snickering fisherman. Be quiet, Phil. And the time you got stuck in a tar pit up to your waist and the chief had to pull you out with Toothless. The men chortled even as Cliff's face turned a deep shade of red. Taryn tried to hide her grin. When was this? Never mind. Cliff murmured, turning away from all the teasing. He paused for one moment before waving his arm wildly over his head. Hi Dad. Taryn turned and waved at Mr. Smedley, who'd just arrived from the back with a large basket of cod in his arms. The dark-haired man nodded at them both in greeting. You know Dad, you should really get a better hold on your staff, Cliff commented, throwing a careful stink eye over the men. They've become quite lazy in their efforts. Oh. Hey no, that's not even true. Mr. Smedley merely smiled and tossed Cliff another small bag of fish. Get out of here, kiddo. Have fun. He winked at Taryn playfully before turning back to his table. Taryn blushed and followed her friend back down the gangplanks. Cliff's embarrassment seemed to have passed, but she couldn't help but ask, trapped in a tar pit? Cliff sighed, leading her down a steep incline toward the beach. I was 11. I was bored and wanted to go out and have some adventure, so I trekked into the woods by myself. Well, Edna was there. Taryn nodded at the reference to his beloved Gronkle. Anyway, I was so engrossed in my explorations that I stepped right into the tar pit. Lost my balance and got the other foot stuck. Edna went and got my parents, who went and got the chief. Yeah. Taryn knocked him in the ribs with her elbow. I'm glad they got you out. Cliff bumped her back with a grin. Me too. Sadly it still took a week for all the tar to come off. He pouted. Kids called me tar feet back then. That sounds terrible. Taryn looked up at him with wide eyes, laughing when he smirked back. Don't start. Taryn laughed and together they tossed puns and stupid jokes back and forth as they walked along the beach. The waves crashed along the shore and slid up the wet sand close enough to touch their boots. Taryn was glad she'd worn pants and a looser top today. Her parents always insisted she wear nice clothes to be presentable, but on occasion they'd allow her to wear more casual clothes. She wondered what they would think about this little impromptu expedition, with a boy. The idea of going anywhere outside their permission with a boy gave her a slight thrill of fear and maybe a dash of rebellion. She never did anything without her parents' knowledge, and she trusted Cliff. He'd never hurt a butterfly, let alone another person. He loved nature and people. Sure, he was a little scatterbrained and wild, but he wasn't a bad guy. So her parents had nothing to fear. Despite the fun she was having with Cliff, however, she still had no idea where they were going. Soon enough a large stack of black rock emerged in the distance. Bags of fish in hand, Cliff bounded towards it and clambered up. He dropped the bags and held a hand toward her. Come on. It's just over the edge. Taryn eyed his hand skeptically. He lightly rolled his eyes, wiped it on his pants to remove the fish grime that had leaked through the bags, and held it back out to her. His fingers were long and thin, his fingertips stained brown from working leather. Yet his eyes were alight with mischief and excitement. She took his hand and he carefully pulled her up onto the rock beside him. After recollecting the bags, he skipped to the other side and slid down the edge. Taryn shook her head and followed, stopping at the edge with a gasp. "Welcome to my secret little oasis," Cliff exclaimed from the sand. Taryn had never seen so many ocean creatures in one place. The black rock was shaped into a horseshoe that merged with a shallow pool of water. Swimming in circles were dozens of little fish of various colors, starfish and sea cucumbers collected on the rocks underwater. The occasional stingray swam through the miniature cove, wings pumping as if in flight. Cliff grinned as she finally reached down and took his outstretched hand. "What do you think?" "It's beautiful." Taryn stepped closer in awe. "When did you find this?" "About a year ago." He paused. "I've actually never shown this place to anyone before." "No." Taryn turned in surprise. "Not even Grandma Ingerman?" "Oh, she's the one who taught me how to go starfish fishing." Cliff shrugged his fingers in midair. "But that was just down on the beach somewhere. I bring her starfish and conch shells sometimes." "Oh." Taryn turned back to the little oasis and watched the multicolored fish swim around. Cliff knelt down beside the water and opened a bag of fish. "Come here." Taryn sat crisscross beside him and grimaced when he pulled out a handful of fish. He stretched out on his belly and plunged his hand into the water. Taryn watched in fascination as a stingray swam over and fluttered over his hand. A moment later it swam away, the fish gone. "Whoa, cool." Taryn leaned forward eagerly. "Do you want to try?" "Oh no." Taryn backed away with a soft laugh. "I couldn't." "Why not?" Cliff asked. "Because that's not really my thing." Saying the word sounded wrong, even to her. Why exactly couldn't she do it? Because it was something new and different and completely out of her comfort zone. "Your parents aren't here, you know," Cliff said gently. Taryn looked at him in surprise. "You don't have to put up a false pretense for my sake. At least not when we're alone." Cliff smiled up at her kindly. Butterflies burst in her stomach in that moment. She didn't know why, but she found herself smiling and brushing her bangs out of her eyes in a shy gesture, like she couldn't hold eye contact for long. Not when he was looking at her in that bright, innocent way. Heart banging in her chest, she nodded toward the bag of little fish. Cliff smiled and pulled one out to drop into her hand. Repulsion hit her and she yanked back her hand. Wait. Maybe not." Cliff laughed. "What? You're not afraid of a little fish oil, are you?" "I'll smell like fish. I always smell like fish. My dad's the manager of the fishery." "Yes, I know." "Hey." Taryn laughed. "Fish are gross. HMPH. Okay, guess you can watch me have all the fun." Cliff winked and fed the stingray another fish. A second stingray swam in faster and tried to take the fish from the first, but it was quickly snatched up. "Unless you want to take a leap of faith and feed this big guy." Taryn swallowed, staring down at the bag of slimy fish with disgust. Gingerly she reached in and grabbed a fish by the tip of a fin. Its gray eyes stared at her with a dead expression and she swallowed hard. Cliff snickered. "Relax, it's already dead. It won't bite." Biting her lip against a squeal, Taryn hung the fish over the water. She didn't want to hold the fish in her hand, but she knew she was doing this wrong. With a hard swallow, she closed her hand around the fish. But suddenly she was afraid to place her hand in the water. Surely if she could handle dragons she could handle a few sea creatures, right? Cliff watched her deliberations with a small smile. Finally he breathed a small laugh and placed his hand over hers. "Here." Gently he pushed her hand down into the water, which was strangely warm on her skin. The silt brushed against her fingertips when Cliff turned her hand palm up, the fish facing the surface. "Now relax your grip." Taryn did as she was told and watched a stingray turn and swim toward her. She tensed as it came closer, but Cliff held her hand firm underwater, his other hand braced at her elbow. "Relax. It will swim right over your hand and take the fish." Right on cue, the stingray fluttered over her hand, causing her breath to hitch in surprise when the creature's soft, blubbery flesh tickled her palm. The fish disappeared from her hand in a moment and the animal flapped away once again. Taryn laughed, watching it go. Well. Just like feeding a terror, huh? She grinned at him to find him staring at her with a matching grin. That's when she realized he was still holding her hand beneath the glassy water. Taryn pulled her hand away and selected another fish from the bag. She could tell from her periphery that he was still watching her, but he finally turned back to the bag and picked out a couple fish himself. They lay side by side for a while feeding the stingrays until at long last, both bags were empty. Sitting up with a wince, Taryn brushed the gritty sand and black rock from her forearms. Now what? Cliff sat up and began pulling off his boots. She watched in surprise as he shed his socks as well and began rolling his pant legs up. What are you doing? Starfish fishing. Cliff leaned in close and shrugged his eyebrows mischievously. Amongst other things. Whilst he stood, Taryn fought the flurry of butterflies that rose in her stomach once again. Since when did Cliff, goofy, mischievous, dorky Cliff, flirt? Before she gathered the courage to ask or come up with a reply, Cliff stepped into the water and gestured for her to follow. Taryn blinked in surprise. You want me to go, in there? Cliff snorted comically. After feeding stingrays, you still have 2 arms. Well yes, but you want me to go into the creature's territory. Yes. Come on, it'll be fun. Taryn chewed inside her cheek pensively, looking all around the sand beneath the water. She hadn't seen anything amiss since they'd arrived a while before. But that didn't mean anything gross with 8 legs wasn't hiding under the sand, or in the shadowy places where she couldn't see. I don't think I can. Cliff raised an eyebrow and crossed his arms. Why not? Because I'll get my pants wet. Roll them up like I did. Yours are still getting wet. Only on the edges. Cliff shrugged. What's a little salty water? I don't like salty water. Taryn, come on. Cliff's expression was very amused. That's bogus and you know it. Taryn made a strangled noise in the back of her throat and looked away. The sound of water splashing across the rocks sounded in her ears as Cliff returned to her side. Why don't you want to come in? I just don't want to. Taryn mumbled. Try as she might, she couldn't avoid his gaze. Cliff raised an eyebrow. Why don't you really want to come in? Taryn didn't want to admit it out loud because it was stupid. Honestly, she did kind of want to go in, but the fear of little crustaceous creatures crawling beneath her bare skin made her skin crawl. You know why I brought you here out of all the places we could have gone? Cliff asked. Taryn shook her head with a wry smile. Because, as weird as it might sound, there's nobody watching. I don't want you to feel pressured or forced into acting a certain way. I want you to be able to relax and be yourself and have fun. That being said, he smiled with a small shrug. I'm not going to force you to go in. I wouldn't do that to you anyway. But like I said earlier, you don't have to keep a stiff upper lip with me, Taryn. Just be you. Taryn's heart swelled. That's all she really wanted at the end of the day, wasn't it? She was tired of long dresses, tight buns and pinchy boots. She was tired of perfect posture and small meal portions and proper etiquette. She loved her parents very much, but they didn't see yet that this wasn't what she wanted. She wanted to be free to make choices or hang out with friends or do random things on a whim. She wasn't a failure or a disgrace to their parentage if she strayed from the norm. Cliff understood that. He was the opposite of what her parents wanted. They wanted calm, collected, hardworking and proper. She didn't know why. They hadn't always been like that. Her big brother Kurt hadn't been that way. He'd married out Larson, a very unethically, untraditional kind of woman. Up until the day he died, he'd been nothing but a playful joker, serious when needed but effervescent, spontaneous, and free. Her eyes suddenly burned and Cliff's expression changed. What's wrong? Taryn shook her head with a small laugh. Nothing. You didn't do anything, it's just, you remind me of my brother sometimes. Cliff's face softened. He didn't reply, only smiled at her gently. With a deep breath, Taryn reached down and began taking off her boots. From here on out, she'd be more adventurous. Little by little, she'd do more with her life than sit still and cook and clean. She wanted to be a wife and a mother, but she wanted more out of life than that. She wanted to enjoy it, like Kurt had. Like Cliff did. And starting today, she was going to do just that. Cliff silently watched her remove her boots and socks and roll up her pant legs. Her mother would probably be having a conniption right now, but she swallowed against the urge to leave her pant legs down. They were legs, everyone had them. Surely Cliff wasn't thinking anything disgraceful over her ankles and calf muscles. Besides, in her heart, she knew this was a growing moment, not an act of rebellion. Setting her bare feet against the rough rock, she sighed, pursing her lips. With a brave nod, she turned to Cliff and said, "I'm afraid of crabs. That's why I didn't want to go in before." Cliff continued to stare at her for a long moment, deep in thought. She wondered if he perceived more of her inner struggle and decision than she'd realized. Finally a small smile spread across his face and he laughed a little. A valid fear. However, I've yet to see any crabs in this area. Taryn swallowed. Are you sure? Yes. Cliff stood, dropping his legs back into the water with a splash. He held out a hand with a grin. Coming. Nervously, Taryn took his hand and slowly slid her feet into the water. When Taryn took his hand and stepped in beside him, she let out a small gasp and clung to his arm in a white-knuckled grip, wide eyes darting around the waters. Cliff was completely okay with this because while she was looking down, he could look at her. He didn't know what had happened in the last 10 minutes, but something had changed. No longer did he feel simple kindness and friendliness toward her. His heart was thumping in his chest a mile a minute, and every time her hands tightened on his bicep, some manly part of his genetic makeup went haywire. Something protective and caring and, dare he say, proud. Yes, he decided. It was pride. To see his friend Taryn battle within herself about what she wanted, and then decide to just go for it, was truly something to behold. For years he'd known her to be right at her parents' side, always cautious and always demure and calm and patient. Not that he disliked those things, it was admirable. But lately he'd come to realize that maybe, just maybe, Taryn Brand wanted more out of life than that. That was why when the chief had told him to find a friend to hang out with today, he'd gone straight to Taryn. And then Grandma Ingerman practically shoved the girl out the door. It was his prime chance to do something spontaneous and fun with her that wasn't completely over the top. Of course she'd shown lots of caution and kept asking questions. Clearly she wasn't used to the element of surprise. But it was a gamble and he would take it one day at a time. So far she hadn't shied away and run back home. She hadn't left him yet. In fact, she was doing just the opposite. Cliff had to fight the wild grin as they walked through the miniature lagoon. As much as he loved feeling her holding onto his arm like this, he gently pulled out of her grasp. He laughed when her eyes went as wide as saucers, but he quickly turned around and took her hands in his while he walked backwards. "It's okay, I'm not going anywhere." He himself was surprised at how gentle his voice sounded. "I swear," Cliff Taryn said through gritted teeth. "If I step on a single crab, you'll get crabby." Cliff grinned. Taryn fought the smile, but her eyes still crinkled with held-back laughter. "Shut up." Cliff smirked back. "Sorry, that was shellfish of me." "Oh my gods. You know what my favorite kind of fruit is?" Cliff asked, raising his eyebrows. Taryn frowned, surprised at the sudden change in topic. If only she knew. "No." Cliff leaned in close. "Crab apples." "Oh, you big!" Without warning Taryn screamed and nearly jumped into his arms. Cliff gasped and looked down to see one of the stingrays swimming past her legs, one of its wings undulating across the surface. "Don't touch the tail." "Hold still, Taryn, I've got you." Cliff lifted her off her feet and spun her around far away from the creature. Taryn stared up at him with wide eyes. He wasn't sure if it was her fear of the stingray or because he'd lifted her clear off her feet without a problem. She was surprisingly lighter than he'd expected. "Sorry." Taryn stepped back, releasing her tight hold on his shirt. "It scared me." "It's okay. Just don't touch their tails, they sting." Taryn nodded resolutely. Cliff looked down and spied a starfish and a few sea cucumbers nearby. He bent at the waist and carefully picked up the starfish, holding it out to her. Want to hold it? Taryn's fingers curled into her palms. Does it move? Not usually. They're quite docile. Cliff wagged his eyebrows at her teasingly and held it out to her again. Gingerly, Taryn took the starfish and once again, surprise took over her features. The expression was quickly growing on him the way the analytical, cautious side of her would melt away and her features would smooth over to marvel over something new. It was almost like seeing a completely different person. Realizing he was staring, again, Cliff shook himself and searched for a sea cucumber. He explained that some of them would hold onto the rocks and forcefully pulling them off would injure or even kill them. It's better to find one that's sitting in the sand. He straightened with a dark green sea cucumber in hand, presenting it to Taryn. He laughed at her utter look of disgust. Do I have to hold that? You don't have to. Like I said earlier, I won't force you to do anything. But you might regret it later on. A stupid story concocted in his brain and he began speaking faster than before, cradling the creature in his arms. What if this is the last sea cucumber to ever cross your path? What if sea cucumbers go extinct and this is the very last one that you will have the opportunity to behold? Taryn's face was crumpled with restrained laughs. Emboldened, he continued his wild fantasy. What a horrible existence to know that you, Taryn Brand, may have held in your hands a precious, completely harmless life in your hand, and you denied it that last gift. Taryn was nearly crying with laughter by this point. Okay. Just let me put this down. With her laughter spent, she sighed heavily and replaced the starfish back in the water. She still cringed but held out her hands for him to pass the next creature. Cliff snorted and laughed when Taryn's face morphed from mild curiosity to that of pure disgust. This thing is so gross. Isn't it just like a woman to cringe at a lovely creature? Lovely creature. It feels like 10-month-old yarnot combined with pig lard. Slathered in fish oil. Cliff cut off his laugh and covered one half of the creature with his hands. Shhhh Taryn. It has feelings. It's disgusting. Taryn dropped her hands and didn't even look down as the sea cucumber fell from her hands and splashed into the water. Cliff gasped loud and gaped at her. That was so rude. You can't just do that to the poor thing. Sorry Jerry. Taryn snickered, turning and walking away. Jerry. What a cute name. Yes. Jerry the sea cucumber. We will forever remember him as the best sea cucumber that ever lived. Well, I hope he and all his kind do go extinct because that's disgusting. Surely you don't actually mean that. Cliff raised his eyebrows. No, I don't, Taryn amended. But I don't want to touch one ever again. Cliff snorted. Ah well, at least you did it once. He watched her walk away and inspect some of the fish when a burst of inspiration hit him, and what better time than now. He swept a hand toward the water and flung a handful of water in her direction. Taryn gasped and whirled toward him, eyes narrowed. Cliff tucked his hands into his pockets and turned away, whistling innocently. A wave of water splashed his back and he paused, turning a narrowed eye over his shoulder. She'd gotten more of herself wet than him in her effort, but the mischievous glint of her eye had to be the best thing he'd seen all day. Oh, it's on. Take cover, Jerry. Cliff spun his body around and swung his leg through the water toward her, sending a column of spray all over her. Taryn screamed, holding out her hands as if to block the water. Of course, this effort failed and she was soon doused in salt water. Cliff doubled over in laughter before waving his hands. Okay, maybe a little too far. He hobbled over to her, careful to avoid starfish. Maybe we should get out. Taryn shoved her wet bangs out of her eyes just as he stepped in front of her. She grinned and pushed against his chest as hard as she could, which was cute because he was a lot taller than her, so knocking him down would be easier said than done. But Cliff instantly knew she had the advantage for two reasons. 1, he was already clumsy by nature, and 2, she'd hooked her leg behind his knee, effectively sending him sprawling backwards into the lagoon. Cliff came up gasping and shook the salt water from his face. He tried to clear his eyes of the painful sting of salt when Taryn's loud guffaws registered. He stared up at her with open shock. He'd never heard her laugh like that. She was leaning against the rock wall, an arm braced against her stomach, the other gesturing at him. Plainly before she doubled over again. With her sopping auburn hair falling out of her perfect bun, bangs stuck to her forehead in all directions and her clothes a rumpled mess, Cliff came to the conclusion that Taryn Brand was the most beautiful girl he'd ever known. Her laughs finally subsiding, Taryn walked toward him and held out an arm. "Here, let me help you." She snickered again, apparently unable to stop. With a smirk, Cliff grasped her forearm, determined to fix that. "Cliff, no." With a sharp yank he'd pulled her into the water beside him. Her head didn't go under but she quickly stood back up gasping, her clothes even wetter than before. Cliff cackled as she gasped and pulled her shirt away from her torso as best she could, the material clinging to her skin. She playfully glared down at him. "Thanks a bunch. Payback is always sweet, Miss Brand." Cliff replied with a wink as he stood, shaking out his arms and wringing out wads of his shirt. "Man, my mom is not going to like this." Taryn mumbled as she climbed out and sat down next to her shoes. Cliff frowned. "Why not?" "Well," Taryn sighed, absent-mindedly pulling her hair out of her bun. Cliff blinked at the sight of her hair down, he wasn't sure if he'd ever seen Taryn's hair undone. "My mom doesn't like salt water. It supposedly messes with her laundry routine." Shaking his head to clear it, Cliff shook salt water out of his own hair and plopped down beside her. He had to stop gaping, he was acting like a fool. "How does salt water mess with her routine?" "Well, the salt mixes in with the rest of the laundry, I mean," Taryn said with a wince as she dragged her fingers through her knotted hair. Cliff watched and decided untangling knotted hair wasn't too different from untangling those huge bundles of leather strips back at the shop. Horst and Eric always gave him that job. Cliff marveled at how long her hair was, it nearly reached her lower back. He watched silently as she continued to talk about her mom's laundry issues, braiding her hair back as she did. Cliff blinked in surprise, realizing that Taryn was actually talking a lot more than he was. The fact that he wasn't talking at all was a surprise. People didn't believe him when he said that he was a good listener. He surprised himself sometimes because he truly didn't know when to shut up half the time. However, at times like this, he was content to sit and listen to the other person. Taryn talked and talked and talked. With a smile, he decided that Taryn really wasn't any different than any other girl. Her parents might have trained her in the arts of pristine perfection, but she could talk a person's ear off just as much as Adriana. His smile faded at the thought and Taryn noticed, pausing in mid-sentence. "What's wrong?" "Nothing, I just thought of Adriana and Finn." His chest felt hollow and he suddenly felt extremely guilty for sitting out here in the middle of nowhere having fun when his friend was either sick or dying. "I'm sure we'll hear something soon," Taryn replied quietly. "I was told Anna was going home later today." Cliff nodded. "Yeah. Hopefully." Taryn brushed dry sand from her feet. "What do you think of her and Eric?" "They're great." Cliff grinned, turning toward her. "I mean, you have to know they're perfect for each other, right?" "Oh, for sure," Taryn nodded. "I don't doubt that. But don't you think they're taking things a little too fast?" Cliff thought for a moment. "Well, by normal standards maybe. Especially considering everything she's been through. But I think more than anything she needs the support and the knowledge that Eric isn't just a friend. He's more than that. He wants her to know and believe that." "Yeah, but," Taryn paused hesitantly. "What about the baby?" Cliff felt slightly defensive for his friend. "You don't think Eric could raise a baby?" "Of course he could. Out of all of us teenagers, he'd be the first guy to do it. But maybe that's what worries me," Taryn said quietly. "Why would that worry you?" Cliff hesitantly asked. "Because we both know Anna can't handle any more heartbreak." Taryn looked him in the eye with a serious frown. "What if he bites off more than he can chew and can't swallow?" "He'll swallow," Cliff replied firmly. "He might choke a little bit because, like you said, we're all kids. But he'll swallow. And honestly, who doesn't choke a little now and then?" Taryn bobbed her head in admission. "True." Gazing up at the sun lowering in the sky, he realized the late hour. Cliff sighed, swiping the sand off his feet and pulling socks back on. They'll be okay. We'll be right there to help them. Yes, we will. Taryn followed his actions, quickly pulling on her socks and boots and straightening her shirt again. Thankfully the sun had quickly dried their clothes. Cliff grabbed the empty fish bags and helped her back up the rock. He smiled when Taryn paused and looked over his little oasis once again. She turned a look up at him and said, "Thank you for sharing this with me." Slightly embarrassed, Cliff shrugged. "It's nothing." "No, not nothing." Taryn looked up at him with a strange expression. He wondered what she was thinking, but the look passed and she looked back down at the mini lagoon. "I'd like to come again sometime, if that's okay." His heart somersaulted in his chest. He'd never been more happy to share something. Cliff nodded vehemently. "Of course. It's open 7 days a week, 24 hours a day." And the best part, he held out a hand so they could begin their descent. Completely free of charge. Taryn laughed and followed him down the slope. Though it killed him to do it, he dropped her hand at the bottom and walked by her side the entire way back to the village. Cliff ran a hand through his mop of curls, wincing with the salty crust he felt along his scalp. He'd definitely need a bath tonight. They walked through the main square and walked down the street towards Taryn's house. Her father was chopping wood outside and paused mid-swing when he spotted them out of the corner of his eye. "Hi Dad." Taryn made to walk past him, but was instantly blocked with a hand on her shoulder. Cliff blinked at how quickly the man had moved. He'd tossed his axe and marched toward them in a span of seconds and was now pushing his way between them. "Where have you been? Is that salt?" Clyde Brand nearly growled at Taryn, whose spine straightened so fast it almost looked painful. "Your mother and I have been worried sick. I was just hanging out with Cliff." Taryn squeaked. Clyde's gaze snapped to Cliff so fast he had to force himself not to flinch. He rallied all the bravery he could muster and said, "Yes, I was just bringing her home safe and sound, sir." "Who gave you the right?" Clyde sneered, stepping in close. Cliff backed away a few steps in shock and surprise. Taryn quickly pushed between them. "Daddy, it's nothing. We were just—" "Did you touch my daughter?" Clyde growled, now drawing in the attention of neighbors. Cliff's face burned. "No. I'd never. Don't you come around here again." Clyde glared, then his gaze snapped down to Taryn. "And you?" "I'm very disappointed." Taryn's face crumpled with hurt. "Dad, we didn't do anything wrong." Clyde snapped an arm toward the house. "Don't talk back to me. Get inside. You look filthy." Cliff watched the tears well up in her eyes. She gave him one last baleful look before darting past her father and slipping inside the house, her muffled sobs the only sound. He could almost feel the air change around them as Clyde stepped toward him. "Sir, I can explain. If I find out you touched a single hair on my daughter's head, I will end you slowly and painfully. I want you to turn around, leave my home and leave my daughter alone. Do I make myself clear?" Cliff gritted his teeth. This was completely uncalled for and ridiculous. He knew the Brands were strict, but he never knew it would come to this. If he decided that he really had feelings for Taryn, was this the roadblock that he would have to hurdle? How would he ever gain approval from a man who wouldn't even let him explain? He'd never been rebellious, but he felt so much injustice in the situation, he wanted nothing more than to talk back. Cliff held his tongue, knowing he'd surely regret whatever might come out. But he would not stop talking to Taryn. He would not abandon her. When he felt he could speak without shaking, Cliff calmly said, "I meant you no disrespect by spending time with your daughter. Without my permission. There is no greater disgrace." Cliff fought to keep a neutral expression. He didn't know what to do or say that wouldn't make the situation worse. He nearly exploded with relief when Hiccup and Toothless exited a nearby street and faced them with concern. "Everything all right, gentlemen?" Clyde turned a look over his shoulder as the chief approached. "No. My wife and I have been worried sick all day concerning the whereabouts of our daughter, come to find this, in great bringing her home hours later than we expected her." Cliff stiffened. If there was one thing he hated, it was name-calling. Hiccup frowned as well. "Now Clyde, I can personally vouch for Cliff. He'd never do anything to He carted my daughter off from her workplace and took her to who knows where without my permission. Clyde growled. Those are numerous offenses. Something that I am sure will not be overlooked in the future. The future? Clyde laughed humorlessly. There won't be a future as far as I'm concerned. Cliff clenched his jaw to keep from speaking. Never say never, Clyde. You would defy me as well. Cliff snapped. That's the chief you're talking to. Clyde's face reddened and he stepped forward. You dare. Hiccup shoved his way between them, Toothless growling. Gentlemen, we're not doing this. Clyde, be reasonable. He did nothing wrong and he certainly didn't do anything with the intention of harming your daughter or disrespecting you. A muscle spasmed in Clyde's jaw as he glared at the chief. At least we both assume he did nothing to my daughter. For all we know he has wooed her delicate mind with his wicked wiles and had his way. Cliff had never felt stronger anger more in his entire life than in that moment. Hiccup turned and pushed him back with a hand on his chest. Cliff, just go home. I'll deal with this. I would never do anything to Taryn. Cliff, I know that. Hiccup replied gently. It's okay. Deep breath, okay. Cliff realized his face was flushed and he was sweating, his palms clammy. He wiped them on his pants and took a deep breath. All right, I will take care of this. Just go home, okay? Toothless, walk with him. Toothless rumbled his agreement and slapped Clyde on the butt with his tail as he trotted past. The man scowled and prepared a retort, but a firm look from the chief made him pause. Cliff saw no more as Toothless shoved him by the hip and pushed him down the street. He chanced to look up at Taryn's house before turning away, and the last thing he saw was Taryn's splotchy face looking down at him from her bedroom window. Chapter 20, Inner Workings. Chapter Text. His butt was numb. Cliff had been sitting outside his Aunt Mara's house for so long, completely bored out of his mind that tingles of pain had started shooting through his gluteus maximus. So bored was he, in fact, that he didn't notice when a pair of blondes slid into seated positions beside him. A poke in his bicep stirred him out of his revelry and he looked over to see Adriana sitting there, smiling in amusement. Cliff gasped and flung his arms around her, engulfing her in a hug. Adriana laughed and hugged him back. Oh man, it's about time. Cliff pulled back and grinned at Eric, giving him a swift hug as well. I've been sitting here for hours. Mara told us. Eric chuckled. Sorry Cliffy, Adriana sighed, pulling her thick hair back into a bun. Cliff smirked at the way Eric's eyebrows shot up at the sudden view of her bare neck. I was hoping to come out earlier and I got hit with morning sickness. Oh, sounds lovely. Cliff frowned. You're feeling better though? You're okay. Adriana's brow pinched but she nodded. Yeah. I'm okay. Cliff chanced to look down at her stomach. Most of her shirt was rumpled in the front, concealing any and all possible signs of pregnancy. How's the lil' cupcake? Eric snorted as Adriana raised an eyebrow. Did you just call my baby a cupcake? That I did. How is she? Oh, so now I'm having a girl? Adriana asked, leaning past him to give Eric a look. Yup. So how is she? Adriana laughed a little. Mara said we're both okay. They. She paused, her smile fading. They didn't hurt me. Cliff wanted to object, the bruise blossomed on the side of her face was evidence enough of their cruelty. But she was right. They hadn't hurt her where it really mattered. His heart twisted in his chest uncomfortably, suddenly remembering Donna bombarding him a few months back. He'd forgotten all about that encounter up until recently when Adriana's rape had been discovered. He wondered if he should tell somebody about it, but at this point it had been a while. Cliff. He shook off those thoughts and smiled at his concerned friends. I'm good. So, the cupcake. Eric rolled his eyes. Do we have to call him that? Him? Cliff demanded. Adriana smiled at Eric with a twinkle in her eye. Him. Eric smiled back knowingly. She grinned and replied, the cupcake is okay. Cliff sighed. That's a relief. She's going to be so cute. What makes you so sure that it's a girl? Eric countered. Because that way I can be her knight in shining armor. I will embellish her with all the glitz, glam and glory a blooming new life needs. Cliff, Eric murmured. A newborn doesn't need glitz, glam, and glory. Excuse me. How dare you rain on my parade? Cliff whipped toward his friend, poking him in the chest with a stiff finger. Obviously by glitz, glam, and glory, I was referring to sprinkles and glitter and baby dragons. Obviously. Eric scoffed in amusement. Adriana was still grinning at them. What about dear Uncle Finn? Cliff's amusement faltered for just a moment, but he plowed forward with a scoff of his own. That beast. I'll have to beat him off with a stick if he thinks he's taking my brand new title and affections of the wee precious. He pointed at Adriana's stomach with gusto. Ours will be an epic, legendary battle for the ages. I will vanquish my greatest foe for the best of my new dearest's affections, for the good of all. Cliff, why are you yelling? Eric exclaimed suddenly. It's just us. Sitting in the street. Nobody else around. Laughing and clutching her middle, Adriana leaned into Cliff's shoulder. Cliff laughed and gently patted her head. This is why. 'Cause I had to make her laugh. Of course you did, Eric smiled knowingly. It has nothing to do with being obnoxious or anything. Cliff gasped, smacking a hand to his chest. Adriana gasped as well, wrapping him in a tight hug. Eric, how dare you? Oh please. He is sweet and precious and positively the best jester known to Burke. Eric snorted. Known to Burke? Yup. So if he wants to expand his jesting career, he should probably get cracking. Adriana nodded with finality. Yeah, I should probably get working on that. Cliff nodded in agreement. Lots of islands to share puns with. Oh geez, Eric sighed, rubbing his face. In all seriousness though, what did you do today? Anything of interest? Tarin immediately flashed into his mind and he had to bite back a grin. Too late he realized they'd already seen it, and they both leaned forward expectantly. Oh ho, I know that look. Eric smirked. Who'd you spend time with? Tell me. Adriana gushed. Tell me. All right already, woman. Cliff laughed and leaned away from her. With a wide assortment of smiles and grins and surprising nervousness, he told them everything that had transpired with Tarin that afternoon. Even what had happened with her dad. Despite their excitement for him and praise for his courage, they were both in agreement concerning her dad. Give him time, Eric said. Don't give him any reason to think you're not trustworthy. How did you get past him? Cliff asked. Eric snorted. Well, for one, I didn't get past him. Tarin's family is very tight-knit, very inclusive. They do everything together. If you want to date Tarin, you're basically going to have to date the whole family. I'm cool with that. I like meeting new people. Alton is pretty cool, whenever he shows up, that is. Hiccup said Johan's ship is coming in the next few weeks. Eric replied. But as for Tarin's dad, I had everything going for me. Her parents have always liked me, so I think they approved. They might have even initiated some of our friendship back then. What do you mean? Adriana asked. A dark look passed through Eric's eyes and he looked away. I was depressed over my dad's death. I was grieving. Tarin is a natural comforter, so I won't say that she didn't try to be my friend only because of her parents. But I don't doubt that they encouraged it. I never thought about it that way. Adriana mused with a shrug. Cliff chewed his lip, mulling over all this information. He still wasn't sure how he'd move forward after Mr. Brown's outburst earlier. But he knew one thing, he didn't want Tarin to feel like this was her fault. He didn't want to leave her alone. Give him a few days to cool off, Eric instructed. Then talk to Tarin in a busy area, like the Great Hall. If you want, we can set it up so we're both there too, and we can do all the initiating so he can't think you're doing something wrong. But there's nothing wrong with you hanging out with Tarin. He'll realize that soon enough. Why is he even so protective of her? Cliff asked. He has to know that she doesn't like this kind of lifestyle. It's overbearing. Eric winced, running a hand through his hair. He seemed to mull over his words for a few minutes before replying. It wasn't always like that. I think Kurt's death made them hold on to their kids even tighter. I can understand why, Adriana commented quietly, wrapping her arms around her middle. I can't imagine. She tapered off. Both boys knew what she meant. Footsteps sounded before Inga rounded the corner, a small smile on her face. The first they had seen in days. Instantly the trio jumped to their feet. What is it? Eric asked pensively. Finn's awake. Inga grinned. The group collectively sighed in relief and Inga pushed through the boys to hug Adriana, who looked like she might cry. After accepting the hug and quickly waving at her eyes, blaming all the tears on pregnancy hormones, she strode past Inga toward the door. Eric made to follow her and Cliff's sadness instantly returned. He wished he could go see his friend too. Hey. The blonde turned with a surprised expression. Don't leave me hanging for another day. Cliff said, quietly begging. Please. Eric nodded. I won't. I'm coming home tonight, so I'll fill you in. Cliff nodded gratefully and watched as his friends disappeared around the corner. He waited until their footsteps receded before sighing and turning towards the direction of his parents' house. He didn't want to sit in the dirt anymore and he wanted more advice on how to approach Taryn and Mr. Brand. When Adriana stepped into Finn's room with Eric on her heels, they were immediately instructed to wash their hands, arms and faces before moving another inch. We're making really good progress, Mara said from inspecting Finn's wound. We don't want to make any mistakes now. Adriana washed her skin quickly yet thoroughly before drying them and throwing the towel at Eric. She snorted when it socked him in the face and pulled it off with an unamused smile. She joined her mom beside Finn's bed, taking Finn's hand when he held it out. She was surprised at first that he even wanted to hold her hand, but she understood when he softly asked, "Are you okay?" Adriana smiled and nodded, forcing back the tears that began to brew. Yes. Thanks to you. Finn gave her a small, pained smile. His face was still pale and he looked exhausted, but he seemed alert given the accident had been the day before. He jerked and squeezed Adriana's hand when Mara prodded the wound. It's okay. You're okay. Astrid said soothingly, pushing his bangs out of his eyes. My hair is filthy because of you. Finn griped. Astrid promptly rolled her eyes, ignoring Eric and Adriana's snickers. Where's Dad? Finn asked, wincing as Mara applied more medication to the wound. Astrid rubbed her eyes. The Great Hall. Adriana frowned. You need to get some sleep, Mom. I'll sleep when I'm dead. HMPH. Mara scoffed, wrapping the wound in gauze. That may be a lot sooner than you think. I'll keep an eye on him tonight. Eric said. Adriana and Mara whipped their gazes to him disapprovingly. Oh no you don't. You're going home tonight. Oh, right. Eric winced. I did kind of tell Cliff I would. MHM. Adriana nodded, adjusting Finn's sheets. That's why I'm staying. Don't be ridiculous. Mara said as she stood, gathering her tools and poultices. All of you are getting a proper night's rest tonight, and that is final. Inga and I will watch over him. I really don't need a babysitter. Finn muttered, rubbing his face. Actually you do. You're still very weak and the wound could still become infected without proper care. Okay sure, but Inga. Finn whispered. Mara shrugged. She is my healer in training. She must learn how to care for patients through the night because one day she will most likely be patching up your sons, because that is the way of Haddocks. Eric snorted. Oh don't you get fresh, Mr. Larson. Mara turned and pointed, her finger darting from his face to his leg. Adriana smirked at the chosen nickname and watched as Eric's ears began to burn at the look she was giving him. The healer prattled on, no better than the rest of them. So I've been told. Eric winked at Adriana, who promptly felt butterflies burst in her stomach. Who knew that in such a short amount of time that they'd be reduced to openly flirting in front of practically everyone? Finn groaned. I do not have the countenance for such flirtatious gestures at this time. Yet you have plenty countenance for sass and drama. Eric pointed out. Yes, as a matter of fact I do. Adriana rolled her eyes and shook her head at her mom, who was staring at her son but clearly struggling to stay awake. Mara patted Astrid's shoulder and turned to Eric again. Eric, why don't you take Astrid home? What? Astrid jerked straight up in her seat. I'm not going anywhere. Dear, you're exhausted. But. Mom, Finn took her hand. I'm okay. I'm not going anywhere. Astrid frowned. What if something happens when I'm not here? Finn snorted. Come on, Mom. Inga will be here to kick my butt if I do something stupid. Too right. A female voice agreed from through the open doorway. Adriana and Eric laughed as Mara shook her head and left the room. Astrid sighed and kissed his forehead. Okay. I'll be back in the morning. Send Dad by if you see him. Their mom stood and nodded, almost unwilling to release Finn's hand. But finally she did, and Eric gently steered her out of the room to take her home. Adriana blinked, suddenly realizing she was alone with her brother. The last time she was alone with him, he'd been lying in a pool of blood in the street, fighting for air. The time before that they'd argued nearly a week ago and she'd insulted him. He'd insulted her. Guilt clawed up her throat and she swallowed hard. Finn gently reached up and wiped a stray tear from her cheek. It's okay. This isn't your fault. Adriana brushed the other tears away and choked on a laugh. When I said you should drop like dead weight, I didn't mean it literally. Finn blinked before a wry smirk eased into his face. Sorry I'm so literal. Someone has to be with all your dreams of grandeur. Ha ha. Adriana sighed. Her amusement quickly faded when she remembered the seriousness of what she'd said to him that day. I'm sorry. I know this has been just as hard on you and I shouldn't expect you to just get on board. Finn frowned. What else should you expect? Adriana blinked, unsure what he meant. You're my sister. You were wronged in the most horrible way. Finn scowled. And I had the gall to act like it was all about me. It was never about me, but I made it about me. So I'm the one that should be sorry. You didn't do anything wrong, Anna. Adriana's shoulders stooped. I did take off. We don't need to get into all that. Finn waved his hand to the side. Giving you grief over that doesn't change what happened, as if you've ever nitpicked me about my adventures on Rune. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. He swallowed hard before looking back up at her. I don't know anything about kids. That's probably the one thing I literally have no experience on. At his fearful expression, Adriana couldn't help the amused laugh. He rolled his eyes and continued, but I want to try. I don't want to be that uncle who's a stranger to your kids. I don't want that for either of us. If that's okay with you. Okay. Adriana asked, reaching out to take his hand again. Finn, of course, that's okay. I mean, believe me, I'm not prepared for this in the slightest. But I think if we all work together we can figure out what to do. Finn nodded in agreement. He glanced down at her stomach for a second, but his eyes darted away just as quickly. Is the baby okay? Adriana smiled and nodded. Yeah. We're both fine. And soon you will be too. HMPH. Finn frowned, glaring down at his wrapped torso. I'm going to die of boredom. I think it will be a while before you start getting really stir-crazy. Gods, I hope not. Finn rubbed his face. I hope this will be a speedy recovery because I don't want to be laying around on my butt for the next month. I highly doubt it will take that long, kiddo. Hiccup said with a smile as he walked in, giving his daughter a pat on the shoulder. At least not lying around. Being able to do stuff on the other hand. Adriana winced. A month is more likely. Or more. Hiccup nodded. Finn sighed long and heavily. Great. Hiccup hid a smile and tapped Adriana on the shoulder. Addie, the guard is waiting outside to walk you home. Lily is there too. Finn frowned. The guard. Adriana gave him a withering look of agreement before looking up at the chief. But I want to stay with Finn. It's okay, I'm kinda starting to get tired. Finn mused, rubbing his eyes. Plus I'd rather you didn't walk home in the dark. If I have a large group of men walking with me either way, why does it matter? Adriana asked. Hiccup's raised eyebrow was his only response before she sighed and stood. She quickly kissed Finn on the forehead. I'll be back tomorrow with stuff for you to do. Oh golly, are you going to bring me that Princess Diaries series you were telling me about? Finn drawled. Hiccup snorted and Adriana set her hands on her hips. Why yes, how did you know? Maybe I can even teach you how to braid hair. Thor, take me now. Finn whispered. Thor must not want you yet if you're still here. The worst, I think, is behind you. Hiccup said as he took Adriana's former chair and nodded her toward the door. I'll be home in a bit, okay? Okay. Rest well, Finnegan. Adriana strode out the door, ignoring his sassy comeback of resting well when he was dead. He probably didn't remember their mom saying the same thing a little while ago. Closing the door behind her, Adriana stepped into the street with a deep breath of salty sweet air. The guards instructed to take her home stood at attention and walked toward her. Lily scrambled past them and nearly shoved her face into Adriana's arms. The girl laughed and hugged her dragon, kissing her purple scales. Whenever you are ready, Miss Haddock. Miss Haddock. Whenever did they decide to start calling her that? Adriana mused. She shrugged with amusement and gestured at the street. Lead on. The group of 8 men split up, 4 leading her down the street and 4 following behind her and Lily. She withheld a sigh, wishing she and Lily could just fly home. She knew that was out of the question, but it would certainly take less time. Her father had become very protective in the last 24 hours and it would seem that he wasn't taking any chances. She hoped he would come home soon and rest as well, seeing as he'd also stayed up half the night sitting by Finn's side. When her house finally came into view and she'd stowed Lily safely in her pen, she bid the guards good night and quietly made her way inside. The house was quiet with her mom already asleep in her parents' room, at least she hoped her mom was sleeping and not worrying. Gently closing her bedroom door and lighting a few candles, Adriana started toward her dresser to find pajamas when she paused. A beautiful white lily was resting on her bed with a small note attached to its stem. Curious, Adriana picked up the flower and note and sat on her bed. She opened the letter and the smile on her face grew as she read. Annie. I know things have been tough lately, but today I realized something. Nothing makes me happier than seeing you smile. So from now on, expect to smile and laugh and have fun the way we used to. Let's start a new adventure today and fill it with less tears and more smiles. I love you. Eric. Adriana felt like her heart might burst out of her chest. She couldn't fight the grin if she wanted to. She quickly found a vase and filled it with water for the white lily he'd given her. Then she opened her diary and tucked Eric's note safely inside. With a happy smile and a newfound hope for the future, Adriana fell into a contented sleep. Finn awoke at a whopping 4 a.m. At least that was the time he told himself for a couple of reasons. Mara's house was completely silent, here were no telltale signs of activity outside, and the curtains were drawn tight across the windows. Inga half sprawled across his knees had nothing to do with it. He held back a smirk and stretched his arms over his head, jerking when pain laced up his torso. He huffed in annoyance. He really wanted nothing more than to get up and move around. His mind felt more rested, but he knew it would be a while before he could get back to his usual rigorous activities. Unintentionally, he moved his left leg, which caused Inga's head to drop to the side. She jerked awake and looked around, her dark hair in disarray. I'm awake. Finn snorted. Right. Inga blinked at him in confusion before she really woke up. You're awake. You're not awake. I am not awake. Inga agreed, leaning on her elbows and rubbing her eyes vigorously. Why did Mara make you do this? Training and other such nonsense. That's dumb. Finn frowned. Sorry. Don't be sorry. It's not your fault. Inga stood and poured water into a small wooden bowl. Here, drink this. You have to stay hydrated. Finn winced at every movement, but he finally managed to drink the entire cup. He wiped his chin with his blanket, feeling slightly awkward about this. But Inga seemed unfazed. It would seem she'd done this enough times that it didn't bother her. Then again, it was just water. Training to be a healer had to entail much more gruesome experiences. Speaking of which, You were there. Finn met her eyes. Inga nodded, settling back into her chair. I was there. She bit her lip nervously, playing with the ends of her long hair. When Evan and Thorin brought you in, I could hardly believe what I was seeing. I've seen injuries before and Eric's leg still takes the cake, but... Finn frowned. He wanted to know what she was thinking. Eric's injury was by far much worse than a simple stabbing. So why was she talking as if this had been a much bigger deal? I should check your bandages. Inga murmured before abruptly standing and grabbing a nearby basket of goods. Are you hungry? He shrugged as best he could. Not really. I'll make sure we make some broth for you. You'll need to keep up your strength. Inga. Finn called her quietly. Come here. She paused in her bustling and gave him that wide-eyed, nervous expression again. Slowly she returned to her seat, but she didn't make eye contact. I'm okay, Inga. He didn't know why he felt the strong need to reassure her, but he didn't like that look of fear on her face. I thought you were going to die. She whispered. It all happened so fast. Finn nodded. I know. I'm not sure if I even understood what was happening. I just knew that I'd never felt pain like that before. You're lucky the knife didn't damage any major organs. Inga shook her head as if to clear her head of any images. We almost lost you. Come on, you can't get rid of me that easily. Finn smirked. Inga rolled her eyes. Idiot. That's what they tell me. I seriously do need to check your bandages though. Inga stood again, rifling through her healing supplies. Can't afford to get lazy now. Finn gave her a wan smile. Thanks, Inga. You're really good at this healing stuff. Though she tried to hide her pleased smile, he instantly knew that he'd said something right. Tongue sticking out of the corner of his mouth, Cliff slid his fingers along the folded paper with precise movements. The corners were sharp, the edges straight. There was no way this plan was going to fail. Okay, so it could completely go the wrong direction, but if that happened he'd just go and get it. He'd done more awkward things before. Unless the note went to Mr. Brand himself. Then he was well and truly screwed. I dare you to throw that at the chief. Helga taunted from beside him. The closeness of her face made his hair press up against his face and he withdrew, lips bunched to one side of his face. Scuss you. Personal space, sweetheart. Eric snorted, a spoonful of soup an inch away from his mouth. What do you know about personal space? Tather. Cliff explained triumphantly, holding up his finished paper airplane. Yeah, Cliffy made a thing. Helga clapped, nodding in approval. Good job, Cliffy. Cliff turned an unamused frown her way, setting the paper airplane in his lap. Excuse me. I am on a very important mission. To impress his lady friend. Eric murmured. Hey. Cliff threw a piece of dry crust at him. Eric dodged with a laugh, trying not to spill his food. Don't call her that. Don't yell or Mr. Brand will hear you. Adriana hissed as she sat down beside Eric, a large bowl of blueberry pie and whipped cream in her hands. Helga bit back a smile. Do you need more whipped cream? Eric turned a half-interested glance at her food before his eyes widened. Geez babe. That's a lot of whipped cream. Even Cliff's eyes widened at the fluffy cream heaped over her pie like a giant cloud. To be honest, he was kind of impressed. Adriana sniffed, plunging her spoon into the bowl. So I like a little blueberry pie with my whipped cream. What's it to you? Yeah, what's it to you? Cliff jeered, ignoring Eric's raised eyebrow. Helga chortled. Right. She's just eating more for Finn's sake. Someone has to eat his portions. Oh man, now I feel bad. Adriana's green eyes widened almost painfully. I can't eat all of this. Yes, you can. No, I can't. What am I doing? Adriana shoved the bowl away toward Eric. Here, you eat it. Eric blinked. No, you eat it. Adriana's eyes narrowed. Why should I eat it? Because you wanted it. Eric stated calmly. No, I shouldn't. Adriana answered her own question, ignoring Eric's response. Why should I be the one to eat all of Finn's extra portions that he isn't here to eat when I'm just going to get fat? Helga cleared her throat. Newsflash, Adriana. What? Eric swiped his hand across his throat in fast movements, trying to cut Helga off. Cliff's smirk and horror only began to grow as Helga opened her mouth. Obviously Finn doesn't need the pie. Or the whipped cream. Helga nodded with finality, surprising them all. He's living it up at the Healers with his own fancy foods that the rest of us don't get to partake in, and what do we get? Helga snatched the rest of Eric's stew. Hey! Beef stew. That's what we get. She shoved the bowl onto the floor, ignoring Eric's indignant frown of disapproval. But Adriana. Helga leaned forward, holding up the bowl of blueberry pie and the quickly diffusing whipped cream. Does Finn get dessert? Adriana's eyes were wide. Does he? No. Helga shook her head wildly, blonde hair flying, bone necklace clacking against her collarbone. He doesn't. Mara says sugar is the anti-healing component made only for disaster. Cliff raised an eyebrow at this increasingly interesting story. Well, that's not necessarily, Eric started. Therefore, the famous fearless Finn does not get dessert. So his portions would go wasted. Helga nearly cried. So who should eat the extra portions, Adriana? Me. Adriana said calmly. What's that, Adriana? Helga shouted. I can't hear you. Me. Yes, so have no shame. Eat all the dessert in the name of your wounded brother. Helga. Eric shouted, pulling Adriana back into her seat as she too began to stand. Please stop shouting. Cliff's shoulders shook at the sight of most of the entire hall watching them with confused looks. The sight of Eric's face slowly turning red was priceless. Adriana gave a satisfied HMPH of agreement and promptly began spooning pie into her mouth. Mercifully the hall began to stir once again and conversation picked back up. We should talk more often, Helga. You're wise beyond your years. Adriana stated presently. Eric gave her a very concerned look, making Cliff snicker again. Thank you, Adriana. Helga nodded in satisfaction. She looked over at him with a regal eye. So Cliffy. You gonna mail that letter or what? Oh. Cliff raised his paper airplane with surprise, having completely forgotten. So devoted to the mission, I see. Quiet, I need to focus. Cliff leaned against the table, the airplane aloft in his hand. He experimentally thrust his forearm forward a couple times in practice. He'd only get one shot at this. Steady, my friend. Helga whispered hoarsely in his ear. This is for the lady. Eric erupted into snickers, burying his face in Adriana's shoulder. Cliff's ears burned, but he didn't remove his focus. After a final experimental swing, he threw the paper airplane with a soft release. She flies. Helga exclaimed hoarsely in his ear. They watched the paper airplane fly across two tables, right over the heads of unsuspecting Vikings. Cliff sincerely hoped nobody would stand up. Finally the paper whisked across the final table and settled in front of his victim, Taryn Brand. Success. Cliff whooped before slapping his hands over his mouth and ducking against the table, hoping Mr. Brand hadn't seen anything. Command, this is Helga Patrol speaking. Helga muttered into her hand. The eagle has landed, repeat, the eagle has landed. Eric rolled his eyes. You guys are so weird. Jabbing him in the ribs with her elbow, Adriana said, fun is fun, Mr. Larson. You should try it sometime. Cliff's eyes widened at the look Eric gave Adriana, who smiled as if she had something to hide. He shared a short, awkward look with Helga before hiding his laugh, but she promptly slapped him in the shoulder. She's opening it. The quartet turned in time to see Taryn sneak the paper airplane to her lap beneath the table and open the note. She quickly read it and looked across the tables directly at him, giving him a confused expression. Cliff raised his eyebrows back in question. Taryn smiled a little and shrugged, tucking the note into her pocket. What exactly did you say in that note? Eric asked. 3 little words, my friend. Helga said, 3 fingers wiggling in the air before Cliff could reply. Are you okay? That's it. Adriana asked, dropping her spoon into the empty bowl. I didn't know who would get it. Cliff said indignantly. Are you okay is a very standard question. What if that note accidentally went to Gobber, huh? He'd be weirded out, but it's me, are you okay isn't that bad. But if he got a note directed to Taryn about specific stuff. Okay, I get it. Adriana sighed. I just don't want to make things worse, that's all. Cliff sighed. It had nearly been a week since Cliff's afternoon out with Taryn. He hadn't spoken to her a single time since, seeing as her parents seemed to be glued to her side. She seemed very subdued in the days that followed their adventure, and he'd never had the opportunity or the guts to talk to her. Finally he'd settled on a note. Granted, the note could have been a little more elaborate, but the last thing he wanted was for Mr. Brand to chew him out again. Or her for that matter. Adriana had even asked a few days ago if she wanted to sit with them. They all knew she did, but a single sharp look from her mother had closed Taryn off. All of them wanted her back in their group, but didn't know how to go about doing that. Good intentions her parents might have, she needed her friends as much as they needed her. Mr. and Mrs. Brand had to know at some point that they weren't doing her any favors. How's Finn? Helga asked, snatching a piece of bread from another table's bread basket. She tore a large chunk from the loaf with her bare teeth. Cliff blinked away from Taryn, who was trying and failing to avoid eye contact with him. He's okay, Adriana said. Tired. Bored. He can't wait to go home. When will that be? Cliff asked. Well, seeing as he didn't really start sitting up until yesterday. Adriana winced. I'm not really sure honestly. Eric hummed a sigh, scratching a fingernail against the table. I wonder how long it will actually take for him to fully heal. The knife went pretty deep. It could very well be a few months before he gets a complete range of motion back. Cliff grimaced. Man, that would suck. He looked over again at Taryn, his heart leaped when he saw her already looking at him. She quickly averted her eyes. He could tell she wasn't in the least bit invested in the conversation around her. Smile, Cliffy. Adriana patted his hand. The time will come. Cliff sighed and turned back toward them, eyes downcast. He watched the crumbs flit around his empty plate with the force of his exhale. He just wanted to talk to Taryn. That afternoon at his little oasis had awakened feelings inside him that he could hardly focus on anything else. Of course he had been forbidden from talking to her the very same day. Just his luck. His gaze fixated on Taryn when she suddenly stood and walked toward the great hall doors without so much as a goodbye from her mother and the other women. Cliff tensed, barely able to stay in his seat to keep from following her. Eric's expression remained passive, but he firmly said, Cliff, look at me. Mr. Brand is watching you. Tearing his gaze from Taryn's retreating back, Cliff cracked a fake smile and looked at Helga. Did you know slugs can be destroyed if you pour salt on them? Hello, you do know who you're talking to, right? Helga raised an eyebrow. The girl who dug up my siblings' dead pets and wears their bones for jewelry. She rattled her bone necklace for emphasis. Eric and Adriana simultaneously cringed. Cliff sighed, doing his best to keep his shoulders from sagging. I know. I was trying to think of something stupid to say to distract me from Taryn. He pressed his lips together in a tight-lipped frown. He didn't know how much more of this he could handle. It was in his nature to talk to people, to be fun and goofy and spontaneous. Since he'd been forbidden from speaking to Taryn, it almost felt like he'd been banned from having fun. He felt on edge all the time, knowing that her dad was probably watching him, analyzing his every move. Adriana broke their silence. You don't have to be afraid, Cliff. I do, though, don't I? Cliff muttered. Don't worry about Mr. Brand, Cliff. Helga said. Just be yourself. Frustration built up in Cliff's chest. I can't just be myself when I'm being scrutinized. I haven't even done anything to deserve scrutiny. To him you have. Eric replied. Cliff scowled. I'm not saying that you did anything wrong. Then what are you saying? Eric glanced at Adriana for a moment before replying. Talk to Mr. Brand. Cliff snorted. You're crazy. No, I'm not. How long did I wait around to even talk to Annie about us? Let alone hiccup? Eric asked. I know it's not quite the same situation, but we all know that there's potential with you and Taryn. Both of you feel it too. Don't wait around for Mr. Brand to sign a marriage contract for the girl before you get up the guts to face him. Cliff's mouth went dry. He'd do that. I honestly don't know, Cliff. Eric shrugged, casually putting an arm around Adriana's back. But if you really care about her and want to see what could happen, why risk anything else happening? Cliff saw the unspoken words in Eric's eyes. Don't make the same mistakes he had. He'd made mistakes, waited around, watched another guy date Adriana, and look at where that had ended. The same couldn't be said for Taryn, but the point still stood. Maybe he needed to gather his courage and talk to Mr. Brand before he lost his chance. Cliff met each of his friends' eyes in turn, seeing the girl's unspoken agreement. He gulped and turned a nervous glance over his shoulder toward Mr. Brand. The auburn-haired man set down his mug and nodded to the chief while they spoke. Suddenly he looked directly at Cliff and narrowed his eyes when they made eye contact. He whipped back around, feeling the back of his neck burn. His curls swayed into his eyes and he blew air past his lips to remove them from his line of vision. Gulping, he met Eric's eyes. Bear in mind, Eric's mouth lifted in a smile. Some fear is healthy. I'm no relationship expert. MHM. Helga smirked. Seeing as someone still has to speak to the chief himself. Eric's cheeks turned a shade of pink and Adriana giggled. Cliff smiled a little but he shrugged. You have it a little easier. Hiccup already knows you. Yes, but he knows my flaws already. He knows where I tend to screw up and what buttons to press to really test me. And he will. Eric winced. You have the benefit of getting to know Mr. Brand with a clean slate. And you're probably the most innocent boy we know, in regards to screw-ups. Helga added. Thanks, Helga. I needed that boost of confidence. Eric drawled. No problem. Cliff sighed, rubbing his face. I'll think about it. Please do. Helga stood abruptly, knocking their cups clean over. Eric yelped and jumped out of his seat to keep his trousers from getting soaked. I'm getting bored of all this moping. Catch ya later. Cliff gave her a quick salute as she walked away. He tried to stay amused at Eric and Adriana as they wiped off the table with a large wad of napkins, but he couldn't help looking over his shoulder again at Mr. Brand. This time, when he found the man still watching him, he straightened his spine and calmly held his eye. It was the longest minute of his life, but finally Mr. Brand's brow relaxed and he looked away. Clyde, might I have a word with you? The Brand patriarch looked up at the chief in surprise and readily nodded. Of course, sir. He stood from his seat, resting a parting hand on his wife's shoulder before following the chief to a slightly more secluded area. What can I help you with? Hiccup casually crossed his arms. Actually, this is about Cliff and Taryn. Instantly, Clyde's walls went up. He bit back a sharp retort about worrying about his own children. He tried for a patient sigh, but it came out more frustrated. Yes. I want to assure you that Cliff would never do anything to harm your daughter. Clyde scowled, looking across the hall. He noticed the lanky, curly-haired boy sitting among his friends, one of whom was the chief's own daughter. He'd yet to witness the boy do anything harmful, but that didn't mean anything. Clyde, you trust me, don't you? Of course, sir. Then I wouldn't lead you astray on this. Hiccup replied patiently. When Clyde didn't reply, the chief followed his gaze. Can I ask why you don't like Cliff? Is it him or is it just boys? Both. Clyde admitted, crossing his arms. There are multiple factors. Such as? Clyde bit back a sigh. He didn't want to tell the chief all of his reasons. However, he knew the chief was both caring and stubborn. He clearly had a soft spot for the young Smedley boy. The Haddocks had never had any disagreements with his family before, so he must have Taryn's best interests at heart as well, right? He's a bit unhinged, don't you think, sir? Clyde finally asked. Hiccup let out a laugh, unable to hide his amusement. He's easily excited, has a lot of energy. But why is that bad? Clyde frowned. Taryn needs structure. She appreciates structure. He watched as the chief's smile slowly faded. Clyde, you can't be serious. Whatever do you mean? Taryn is the most structured teenage girl I know. She's punctual, organized, respectful, she has a great rapport with the elderly as a fine young woman who would do anything to help someone in need. Clyde swelled with pride at the compliments. He hadn't known the chief to have such a high regard for his daughter. Yes, so she needs a husband who can continue to lead her in such a way. Hiccup's brow furrowed. That's the thing, she doesn't need to be led to do that stuff. She's a natural helper, she enjoys doing it of her own free will. She doesn't have to be told to do things. With a small laugh, he added, unlike my daughter, who has always done her own thing. Adriana has commendable qualities, sir. Clyde said firmly. She does, and so does Taryn. She doesn't need someone to tell her what to do, Clyde. She enjoys doing the things she does. Hiccup paused for a breath. But I've noticed that she seems a little subdued. Clyde frowned. How do you mean? I think she feels pressured. She has all these expectations that she's trying to live up to. She wants to make you and her mother proud, which is commendable by far. So Hiccup said slowly. I think she's losing her joy. Losing her joy. Taryn always had a big smile, Clyde. I remember the first time I heard her laugh, and she has a boisterous laugh only rivaled by my wife. Clyde hid a smile. She does, doesn't she? Yes. But I haven't heard that laugh, or even seen that smile for quite some time. Indignation flared in his chest. With respect, sir, exactly how much do you pay attention to my daughter? Hiccup shrugged. I'm the chief, she's a good friend to both of my kids. I keep an eye on all of them. Clyde tapped his foot impatiently. What is your point in saying all of this? My point, Clyde, is that I think Cliff is a perfectly harmless young man who just likes to make people smile and laugh and enjoy life. I don't know what the future holds, but any young man who's willing to go above and beyond what it takes just to make your daughter smile is worth giving a shot to. Clyde sighed deeply with a scowl, crossing his arms and glancing between the teenagers once again. Taryn suddenly stood from her seat and left the great hall, ignoring her mother's protests. Clyde watched her go for a moment in concern before fixing his eyes on the Smedley boy. He was watching Taryn go with a melancholy expression. She's not happy, Clyde. Hiccup said quietly. Cliff looked up and caught his eye. Clyde hardened his expression, silently daring the boy to test him in some way. Instead, he straightened in his seat and calmly held eye contact. It suddenly appeared to him that the boy had a little more backbone than he had given him credit for. Clyde relaxed his stiffened frame with a sigh. How do you do it? Hiccup turned to him in surprise. Do what? Trust a young man with your daughter after. Clyde halted his words. A muscle fluttered in the chief's jaw for a moment before he shuffled his feet. I'm sorry, sir, I shouldn't have. No, it's all right, Clyde. It's a fair question. Hiccup assured him calmly. Silence lingered and Clyde felt the need to continue. Adriana is a bright young woman, but she's been through so much. She's carrying a child. How do you know Eric is right for her? The chief's green eyes locked on his. Because it's Eric. He'd never hurt her intentionally. He wasn't there for my daughter once. Clyde said, instantly regretting the words. The chief looked curious, but he buried the words and emotions that came with that explanation. How can you trust him? Because he's practically a son to me. I know him. How well do you know Cliff? Clyde scoffed. I've observed enough. Clyde. He's loud and obnoxious, he has no self-control. If the situation is serious enough, he can be very self-controlled. He hasn't proven his merit. Hiccup smirked. Well, that's where you need to test him and see what he's made of. If he really cares about Taryn, he'll do whatever it takes to prove himself to you. Clyde scowled, his anger returning. He still carted my daughter off without my permission. Ah, well, I'll be honest, the Smedleys are a little more laid back. That's not his fault, he didn't think anything of it. But that's the thing about your daughter's dating, Clyde. You can set the standard for how things go. Where they go, what time she comes home, all those details. That's all assuming that I allow this. Hiccup deflated from his growing excitement. I suppose. Talk to Taryn though. I think she'd feel a lot better knowing that she's able to approach you with hard topics like boys. Clyde considered this. Why wouldn't she approach me with such a topic anyway? The chief raised an eyebrow. Oh come now, Hiccup. I'm not that overbearing. The auburn eyebrow did not lower, but instead was joined by the other. The incredulity on the chief's face really made him re-evaluate the situation. Finally, he sighed and nodded. All right. I'll talk with Taryn. But I make no promises on the Smedley boy. Hiccup clapped him on the shoulder. Just give her a chance to at least talk to you about it. Then you can establish trust with her and you can move on from there. Because honestly, Clyde, I don't think anyone could dispute Taryn's love and loyalty to her parents. Pride flooded his chest once again, touched at the words. You think that highly of my daughter? Why don't you set her up with Finn? Hiccup laughed. I don't think either of them would like that very much. They are both good friends, but they are not interested in the same things. Taryn's delicate and patient and sweet. Finn is, all brawn and sweat and thrills. Clyde wins. Yes, never mind. That wouldn't make a good match. Nope. Hiccup smirked, turning towards the doors. I have to run but I'll catch up with you later. All right. Good talking to you, Chief. Clyde paused. Hiccup. He turned back around with a surprised expression. Thank you. Clyde nodded to him. I appreciate your honesty. Hiccup nodded with a smile and strode toward the doors again. Clyde ran a hand through his graying auburn red hair, the same hair that his daughter had acquired. He wondered at the chief's words. What if he really was being too hard on Taryn? He glanced over at Cliff, who was listening to Adriana speak with rapt attention. Perhaps Taryn wasn't the only person to talk to about this after all. Chapter 21, Homecoming. Chapter text. A wise man once said, time flies when you're having fun. Well, that old man could zip it because these last 2 weeks sucked. At least, that's what fearless Finn thought as he slowly rolled out of the bed he'd occupied for a better part of the month. In all his life, he'd never known such exhaustion, physical pain, and serious boredom. Occasionally he could still feel the ghostly pain of Rattri's beatings, even though the scars from his frightening past had healed long ago. But the grueling hours of recuperation from a stab wound. That one takes the cake. Finn sighed, glaring down at the white strips of cloth still wrapped around his waist. Gathering his willpower, he looped his arms through his shirt and slowly pulled it over his head. He'd almost finished the minor task pain-free until he made the mistake of jerking his shoulders back and a sharp pain lanced up his side. Ow! Gods, Finn whispered, a hand at his side. Careful or you'll bust a seam. You'll dirty the sheets. Finn rolled his eyes, unsurprised that Inga was watching from the doorway with a smirk. In the last weeks it had been her duty to keep an eye on him and make sure he didn't get sick or do anything stupid. Inga, as much as it pains me to tell you this, Finn teased. I am going home today and I dare say you will not see me around here again for quite some time. I could very well be putting you out of a job. Inga snorted. Oh sure. Knowing you, you'll be back tomorrow whining for pain relievers. She sauntered into the room, donning a large frown and a hand pressing against her ribs. Inga, my side hurts again, do you have any turmeric paste? I have had enough of turmeric paste for one lifetime. Finn grimaced. Inga, what am I going to do without you? She pressed on, ignoring his glare. I've become so accustomed to sitting on my rear all day, what am I supposed to do with my life? I think I've lost my sense of purpose. Hey! Finn abruptly stood. He just barely stopped himself from lunging after her as she danced away on light feet. That is so rude. Inga cackled from the doorway. Come on, redhead, let's get out of here. Finn bit back a goofy smile, unsure why she'd suddenly started calling him redhead. He supposed it was an improvement from words like idiot and stupidhead. Was insulting one of Inga's love languages. He strode out the door, not sparing the room another glance. He was leaving this place and he did not plan on returning. The last few weeks had been rough. It had taken days to be able to sit up again, and even longer to stand and move around without feeling faint. Those days had been long and painful. Despite Inga's jesting, he had to admit that those days had been the hardest. For most of his life, he'd always gotten up at the crack of dawn for an early morning workout with his dragon, followed by a long day of working his body into a sweat with work and training. He'd never felt lazier and more useless than in the last 2 weeks. He found Mara standing by the door with crossed arms. Her expression made Finn mentally prepare for a lecture that he'd not soon forget. Now Finn, Mara began, ignoring Inga's smirk from beside them. There will be no working, no exercising other than those few strengthening exercises I have given you, no rough housing with the boys, and absolutely no flying. If you feel any pain or sickness outside of the norm, you will contact me as soon as possible. If I so much as hear a word of any of the above, I will find you and put you back in that healer's bed until you can move freely with no pain whatsoever. You will be here for another month. Do I make myself clear? Finn nodded adamantly. He'd do anything to keep from returning to this place anytime soon. The healer sighed and she patted his arm suddenly, her sternness evaporating into something softer. I'm glad to see you leave. Finn smiled, his heart swelling a little. I don't think I can stand any more sass. Hey, I was keeping you entertained. Well, of course. Inga elbowed him in the arm. Anyone on that many drugs at one time would be entertaining. Careful, I might have to come back for more later. Mara rolled her eyes. Do not come back to my home unless you need to, fearless Finn. Finn grabbed the door handle, but couldn't help adding, but Inga's here. Inga's face flushed and he couldn't help the grin. Mara shooed him out the door and he bid them goodbye before Inga could come up with a response. Taking a deep breath of fresh air, Finn surveyed the village. Villagers milled the street despite the early hour and many smiled and waved at him as he finally left the healers. It felt amazing to be outside, to feel the heat of the morning sun on his head and the gentle breeze blowing against his hair. Mara had been generous and allowed him to walk outside a little bit the last few days, but it had only increased his hunger for freedom. He hoped he'd never be bedridden again. He bit back a gasp when he got too excited and moved too hastily. Ignoring the impulse to put a hand on his side, he clenched his jaw and kept walking. He still tired easily and wouldn't be able to exert himself for probably a few weeks yet. Finn. Looking over, he saw his dad and Toothless walking toward him. He smiled and allowed Toothless to sniff his side, probably checking how much pain he was in. The Night Fury warbled at him, his fishy breath blasting his hair out of his face. Yeah, I'm glad to be out too. Finn furiously scrubbed the dragon's scales behind the ears, making him purr. Someone missed you, it seems. Hiccup grinned at the exchange. He clapped his son on the back carefully. You're out already. I didn't think you were leaving until later. Are you kidding? I wasn't staying there any longer than necessary. Finn grumbled. He took another deep breath of salty sea air and sighed. It feels so good to be outside. His father smiled, clearly excited to see his son finally out of the healers. Your mom is still at home. We were going to pull down a bunch of stuff from the attic, see what we can find for your sister. But you can stay outside for as long as you want. Finn shrugged. At this point, anything sounds good. An excited growl caught his attention and he straightened, turning toward the sound. His beautiful shockjaw hurtled toward him at top speeds and Finn threw out his arms to accept the hug. That's when he realized his terrible mistake and he gasped, bracing himself for the world of pain he was about to land in. Without warning, Hiccup ran out in front of him and stretched out a hand. Zap, wait. Zap slammed to a halt, her claws digging long streaks into the ground. She slid for the last few feet until her nose was a mere inch in front of Hiccup's hand. She stared at it, seemingly mesmerized. Finn blinked in shock. His dad still surprised him sometimes, even after his entire life around dragons. Hiccup stepped closer, gently resting a hand on Zap's snout. Zap, you have to be careful. Finn's still injured. You have to be gentle. Okay. Zap stared up at him before looking at Finn. She began to dance in place in excitement, but when the chief stepped aside she merely trotted forward and pushed her face into his arms. "Hey, baby girl." Finn laughed, but couldn't help the slight burn in his eyes. He'd missed his dragon more than anything these last few weeks. Zap whined and pushed into his chest farther, making him step back to keep his balance. "It's okay. I know. Easy, Zap." Hiccup warned. "It's okay, Dad. I'm okay." Finn rubbed her scales and kissed her between the eyes affectionately. "Thank you for taking care of her." His dad smiled gently. The first week was rough. She wouldn't leave that window. Finn remembered the first day he'd been allowed to walk around his room. The first thing he'd done was hobble to the window and look out at Zap, lying in the hot sun with nearly opaque scales. Zap was the first shockjaw they really had any knowledge on, but they'd learned a few things about the creature in the last few weeks. Now they knew what happened to depressed shockjaws that refused to eat and avoided water for a week. Thankfully, when she'd seen his face appear in the window, she'd snapped out of her stupor and nearly run to the window. They'd pressed their faces against the glass, and he'd made faces at her until she howled into the air like she always did. By the end of that day, she'd nearly eaten an entire bucket of fish and spent the entire evening swimming in the ocean. Apparently all she'd needed was to see that her boy was okay. "Still kinda dry, Zappy." Finn noted the dry scales flaking under his fingernails. "I'll have to lather you up with some fish oil." Zap's head snapped up in excitement. "Yeah. That sound good. Who's a good owl?" Finn gasped. Hiccup frowned. "All right. Fine, I just keep jerking around too much. We should get home. I don't want you overexerting yourself." "I'll be fine, Dad." Finn whined. "Don't make me go home yet. You're still weak, Finn. There's no riding home on Zap and home is still a long way away." Hiccup reasoned. "If you walk around the village for too long and then have to make the long trek home, you're going to regret it." Finn sighed heavily, staring longingly at the village. He just wanted to run and be social without laying around in bed anymore. But his dad was right, the walk to their house alone would wear him out. Plus if he got stranded in the village and couldn't make it one, he'd have to go back to Mara's for another night. That simply would not do, he was never going back to that place. "All right, fine. A tarboy." Hiccup slung an arm over his shoulder and led him through the streets, both dragons guarding their sides. "I know it's been a rough 2 weeks, but we'll do our best to make sure you aren't bored out of your mind." "Okay." Finn was grateful he had been allowed to leave the healers so soon. 2 weeks to get back on his feet from a stab wound. That was remarkable progress, even he was surprised. Mara and Inga and Heather had done good work to keep him in proper health. But he couldn't help the despondency rising up in his chest. His mind and soul said, "Go, go, go," when in reality, his body was saying, "No, no, no." Hiccup squeezed his shoulder. "One day at a time, kiddo." "Yeah." A typical walk from Mara's to the Haddock's home was about 15 minutes. It seemed like the time it took to leave the village had doubled. Finn realized 2 things on this arduous walk. 1, his dad had never been more right. He was ever so thankful he'd gone straight home. He wouldn't have made it there if he'd dilly-dallied around the village for hours. And 2, it was embarrassing how easily exhausted he was now. They had to stop at least 3 times on the walk home for him to rest. He could feel the exhaustion weighing on his body as if he had metal limbs. Once again he was glad they lived outside the village because this was embarrassing. "I hate this." Finn panted, forcing himself to keep walking. Finally they could see the house in the distance. The dragons had darted forward and left them in the dust. His father could easily outwalk him and he had a freaking peg leg. This was ridiculous. Hiccup, however, was very patient and encouraging the entire time. Except now he was looking at Finn like he'd grown a second head on their travels. "Maybe we should." "I am not stopping now." "Finn, your face is turning red." Grinding to a stiff halt and ignoring the sharp pain it produced, Finn glared at his dad. "Don't coddle me." Hiccup gave him a level stare. "I'm not coddling you. You're tired and don't have the physical strength you used to from blood loss and healing, and I know that frustrates you. But you have to give your body the time to heal, or it will take even longer for you to regain that strength. I know. Finn growled, stomping toward the house again. His father matched his gait wordlessly, seemingly expended all his pep talks. Finn didn't even know why he was suddenly so crabby, but the house still felt so far away and the sun was hot and his legs felt like iron blocks. Black spots danced in his vision and he stumbled. A strong hand grabbed his arm and he suddenly felt himself eased to his knees. He blinked away the spots and suddenly saw his dad crouched in front of him, patting his face. "Hey, kiddo, stay with me." Finn blinked, realizing that he must have started to black out. He sighed in defeat. "Sorry. Finn, do not apologize. You did nothing wrong," Hiccup stated calmly. "But you know this is why you have to be careful, don't you?" Finn nodded, wiping the sweat off his face. "Okay." Hiccup studied his face with worry. "Do you think you can stand?" He nodded again and allowed his dad to help him back to his feet. His knees wobbled a little bit, so Hiccup firmly slung Finn's arm around his shoulder and kept him steady as they finished the short distance back to the house. The front door flung open and his mom hurtled down the porch. "I saw what happened from the attic window. Is he okay?" "He's fine, just hot and tired," Hiccup assured her, helping him up the stairs and inside the house. His dad helped him into the comfiest chair in their living room and Finn heaved a great sigh. "Now I know what Binnen felt like." His parents laughed, sharing an amused smile. "I'll get you some water," Astrid said, marching to the kitchen. Finn couldn't help the contented sigh that escaped him as he relaxed into the chair. He hadn't been home in weeks and now that he'd returned, he finally felt like he could relax without some healer hovering at his side. Finn looked around the cluttered living room, surprised at the amount of boxes on the floor. He honestly didn't know they'd had so much stuff in the attic. He wiped his face on his sleeve once again, frowning at the weight of his arm. A cup of water was held out to him and he looked up at his mom in surprise. "Oh, thanks." He bit back a scowl at the way his hand shook, but he managed to drink the entire cup without spilling. He nearly hated the way his parents were watching his every move like he might slip into unconsciousness at any moment, but they had every reason to worry. He'd just almost passed out in their front yard after all. Finn rolled his eyes. His pride would be the death of him, one day. "When do you guys think is a good time to start getting baby clothes?" Adriana's voice suddenly wafted down the stairs, followed by her small footsteps. "Should I start collecting now or wait till the last?" She stopped at the bottom of the steps in surprise. "You're home." He nodded with a wan smile. "More or less." "Gods, you look." Adriana winced. "You look awful." "Addie." Hiccup whispered. "Well, he does. I feel awful to be honest." Finn winced, feeling pretty sick overall. Astrid reached out to feel his forehead and he turned his head out of reach with a raised eyebrow. With a stubborn smile, she snatched the cup out of his hand to refill it. "I'm okay, I'll just lounge in this comfy chair for a while." Finn sighed. "Nothing sounds better." He froze, his eyes on his sister's stomach. "Holy crap, did you swallow a melon?" For the first time in months, he was seeing her in an item of clothing that wasn't long-sleeved or baggy, meant to conceal her pregnancy. Because of the rising summer heat, his sister was wearing a loose tank top with a pair of comfy pajama pants. Now her stomach was a perfect little baby bump, which turned Finn's head in on itself. He'd known for a while now that his sister was having a baby. She'd come to visit him countless times while staying at Mara's and he hadn't noticed a thing. But now it was obvious, his sister was visibly pregnant. Adriana stared open-mouthed at him before looking down at her belly. "No. It's not that big. You weren't that big 2 days ago." Finn insisted, turning his head side to side in the attempts of a different view. "It's huge. Oh honey, if you think it's big now, you've got a whole other thing coming. Things are just getting started," Astrid said, handing him the second cup of water. Finn said, eyes still on his sister's belly even as he drank. Adriana rolled her eyes. "Do you want to feel it like everybody else?" "What?" "No." Finn cried indignantly. "Good, because I'd say no anyway." Finn raised a critical eyebrow. "Who else touched, felt, Who else? As he found a seat on the couch, Hiccup laughed. I swear, Astrid, he's more awkward than I was. Hiccup, nobody in the history of mankind was, is, or ever will be as awkward as you. Hey. Finn laughed into his cup before forcing himself to stop. He couldn't even laugh without feeling pain. Adriana took a seat next to their dad on the couch. Cliff, Taryn, Helga. Well, and Mom and Dad obviously. And Eric. The way she tapered off and bit her lip at the addition made Finn roll his eyes long and hard. They were such dorks, it was painful. Hey, don't judge me. I heard all about your endless flirting with Inga. Finn ducked his head. Dunno what you're talking about. Come on, kiddo, everybody knows at this point. Hiccup smirked. So are you going to ask her out? Are you out of your gourd? Finn erupted, the idea sending fear bursting through his stomach. Or maybe that was the injury. Snotlout would kill me. Not necessarily. Hiccup amended. Astrid snorted. I'd love to see Finn duke it out with Snotlout for Inga's hand just to see a haddock finally whoop his behind. I will not be whooping anybody's behind, let alone for Inga. Finn exclaimed. Why not? Adriana asked teasingly. You don't like Inga? I never said that. So what's the big deal? Ah hello. This is Inga we're talking about. Duh, who do you think we were talking about? She's 13. Their parents' amusement slipped off their faces and realization dawned on them. Oh. Hiccup breathed. That's a very valid point, Finn. I don't know what is between us exactly, Finn admitted nervously. But I can't just date a 13-year-old without knowing how I feel. Right. Besides, would Snotlout even go for that? Astrid bunched her lips to the side as she thought. Hard to say. I'd say talk to her. She's very mature for her age. Yeah, but she's 13. I'm not. Finn replied lamely. Eric is a year older than me, Adriana said. What's the big deal? It's different when you're older. You know how much growing takes place when you're between 13 and 15. Hiccup snorted. Try 13 to 30, kiddo. You're not even halfway there yet. Finn winced. Good point. I still say you should talk to Inga about it. See what she thinks. And, if you have guts, talk to Snotlout and see what he thinks. Astrid said with finality. Pulling a large box toward herself, she began rummaging. Now, let's see what we can find. Still tired from his journey home, Finn was very much content to watch his family rummage through the boxes. Occasionally someone would emerge from a crate with a pronounced O, with the discovery of some old trinket of his or Adriana's. Their mom's favorite so far had to be a pair of tiny brown boots. Yoo-hoo, these were his first pair of shoes. Astrid squealed, shoving them into her husband's face. Just look at them. Yeah, Hiccup drawled, eyeing his son's now not so small feet. Just look at them. Finn shrugged, even as Adriana chuckled. He couldn't find the energy to come up with a sassy remark at the moment. Astrid, however, raised an eyebrow. Well, he is your son. What's that supposed to mean? Hiccup sputtered, hands gesturing wildly. Your family has big feet. What they did not. Look at these. Astrid whipped a leg up so fast that he had to jerk back to avoid a broken nose. Their children sniggered in the background. I have small, dainty feet. So does your daughter. So Finn got his gigantic feet from your side of the family. Hey! Finn cried indignantly. Now Astrid, let's not be ridiculous, Hiccup reasoned. Who knows where the big feet really came from? Are we sure he's not half troll? Adriana asked from the depths of another box. I am not. I do not want to know how that even would have happened. Hiccup replied with much sarcasm. Astrid's eyes narrowed, but then she smirked triumphantly. No, we surely have proof of who had the bigger feet. Finn raised an eyebrow interestedly, wondering what she was thinking. His father also straightened in his seat. And what's that? Astrid smirked. Well, she looked down at his prosthetic. Toothless did save you by grabbing your leg with his teeth. And you were so teensy-weensy back then. So obviously the biggest, easiest thing for him to grab was your gigantic feet. Finn snorted at her logic. Obviously. Hiccup rolled his eyes. So I assume my left foot was the bigger of the two as well then. Of course. Lefties always have the bigger head. What? Hiccup demanded. Everyone knows that right-handed people are more favored. This has got to be one of the weirdest arguments in our family, by far. Adriana announced as she pulled a wicker basket onto her lap. I agree. Finn nodded with a slow, heavy blink. The small action wasn't lost on his parents, however. You can go upstairs and sleep a bit if you want, Finn. He shook his head. I'm good. All right. Astrid hedged. Just don't feel like you have to stay awake. You should let your body rest when it wants to. I know. HMPH okay then. Astrid sniffed, turning back to her husband. Now, where were we? Lefties are more superior to righties. They are not. Yoo-hoo, look what I found. Adriana interrupted, holding out a floppy leather notebook. Dad, is this yours? Hiccup's face lit up in recognition. Oh yeah. I never throw away a good journal. That's an understatement. Astrid drawled. We used to have complete shelves covered in half-used journals. I like journals. Hiccup exclaimed. Is that such a crime? We don't have the space. Astrid griped. Mom, headache. Finn muttered. You really should go to bed, Finn. He frowned. I'm just saying cause you keep yelling. Oh. Sorry. Anyway, Adriana held out the old brown leather journal. Look at all these. Finn took the book and began flipping through the pages. Numerous pictures of dragons covered the pages, complete with scrawled notes on training the beasts. Size, height, weight estimations, favorite foods, allergens, anything you could possibly want on dragons had to be written down. I used to write it all down. Long before we had an actual book on training them. Hiccup explained. Oh, here's some more. Adriana tossed another journal Finn's away, even as she rifled through a third book. Finn flipped through this one, a stiffer-backed journal that didn't seem nearly as old as the first. His parents chatted while they looked through their dad's old books filled with drawings and inventions and random thoughts. Finn smirked when he found a few pages on teenage drama between his parents. What are you laughing at? Hiccup suddenly asked. His reputation preceded him, a fearless Finn smirk was never a good thing. Oh, Finn sighed dramatically, holding the book close to his face. Just reading your notes on pining after Mom. Hiccup suddenly jumped from the couch. Don't read that one. Come on, Finn laughed, twisting away from his dad's grabbing hands. I know how it ends. Exactly, so you don't need to read my book, Skimmy. Hiccup snatched it from Finn's hands, and in so doing collapsed over the side of the chair with a loud bang. Ow. Smooth. Astrid commented without looking up from her pile of journals. Better you than me. Finn grinned. I'll look at the cute mommy and daddy drawings. Adriana cooed. Shoot. Hiccup scrambled off the floor. Oh, I wanna see. Finn tried to get out of his chair but decided against it when his side screeched in pain. Adriana evaded her dad's grabbing hands much easier than he had, since she had better range of motion. Seeing his dad's face go pink with awkward embarrassment was truly priceless, however. Hiccup, do I even want to know what's in half these journals? Astrid asked, eyebrow raised. His skin tinged pinker. Nothing inappropriate. Then what's the big deal? Adriana asked, skirting around him into the dining area, still flipping through pages. They are good drawings. Let me see. Astrid held out a hand, waving her fingers forward insistently. Adriana. The blonde sighed heavily and handed over the notebook. With quick but careful movements, Finn hopped into the seat next to his mom so he could see the images. His dad was whining as he stood above them, hands flailing. Always had to write everything down. Why didn't I ever learn? Adriana peered over Astrid's shoulder as they flipped through the pictures. Many of them were pictures of people from the village, most of them their tight-knit group of friends. Fish legs and meal chug surrounded by rocks, rough nut and tough nut fighting on the ground, I see some things never change, Adriana had commented, but their favorite by far was a drawing of Snotlout boasting about his pure awesomeness with quickly written dialogue above his head. Once an idiot, always an idiot. Astrid murmured. Their dad's ability to draw was uncanny. They knew exactly who every person was in each drawing. Occasionally there was an individual that didn't resonate with Finn, and Astrid would flip the page faster. I hated that man. Hiccup frowned. Who? Alvin. Oh. Hiccup sounded surprised. I don't remember drawing him. The next image was an exact likeness of Stoic the Vast. Oh Poppy! Adriana exclaimed. Finn smiled. Looks exactly like him. Hiccup sighed in resignation and plopped down in the empty seat beside his wife, Adriana looming over their shoulders. I forgot about all those braids in his beard. Adriana commented. Hiccup snorted suddenly. They all looked at him with interest. What? Astrid asked. Hiccup shook his head. I remember this one night he took the cords out of his beard for wash day and... He stopped to laugh a little. His beard was 3 times the size as normal because his hair just got all frizzy. Oh dear. Astrid sighed. I couldn't help laughing. I was 8. Finn snickered even as his mom kept flipping through the pages. This particular notebook was larger than the rest and the binding wasn't as worn. Halfway through, Hiccup guessed that this notebook wasn't as old as the others. Astrid smiled knowingly at her husband when a portrait of her from the shoulders up came next. Her hair was braided back with swooping bangs across her forehead, over her headband, and her big blue eyes were crinkled at the edges in a smirk, like she was telling Hiccup I told you so. I'd say our son got my smirk. Astrid teased. Even as his dad met her eyes, Finn could tell there was some nervousness there. Probably because his kids were looking through his old drawings of his, but he had to admit that his dad was still crazy over his mom, even 20-some years later. How old were you in this, Mom? Adriana asked. Ask him. Astrid nudged Hiccup in the ribs. Oh. Hiccup looked back at the picture. Maybe 17. Finn breathed a laugh. It was strange to see a drawing of his mom at 17 when he and his twin were currently 17. They paused when an image of Dager the Deranged appeared on the next page. Why did you draw him? Adriana asked quietly. Hiccup shrugged. I used to have nightmares about him. I hoped getting it down on paper would help. Did it? Finn asked. No. Hiccup reached up and flipped the page, hoping to close the conversation. Instead, they all froze. Next was a single image of an elderly man sitting at a table, whittling a piece of wood. Wrinkles covered his face, but his eyes crinkled at the sides from smiling and laughing often. He looked calm, happy, content, just as they remembered him. Benin. Finn whispered. Oh honey. Astrid wrapped an arm around him and kissed his temple. It took him a second to realize a few tears had slid down his face. We can. No, it's okay. Finn swiped his face quickly. It's fine. I didn't even. He stopped, unsure what to say. His dad was fidgeting on the other side of his mom, probably feeling guilty. Benen's sudden death had taken a toll on all of them. He'd been a warm, happy light in their home in the aftermath of so much family struggle. He'd become another grandfather to the kids, a mentor and friend to the parents. Finn didn't doubt that a day didn't go by where his family missed Benen just as much as he did. They didn't talk about the past nearly as much as they should. He didn't know if that was partially his own fault, because he'd handled Benen's death so badly. He hadn't been able to speak his mentor's name for months and months in the midst of grief. But those days had gone, and while he still missed Benen dearly, he'd come to terms with the fact that death was a natural order of life. You can't prevent it, and sometimes it comes when you least expect it. But you should still love and remember the times you had with that dear person you lost. Finn swallowed. Do you have any more drawings of Benen? Hiccup looked up at him, eyes strangely bright. He smiled wanly and took the book from Astrid. I might. A mutual feeling of understanding passed between them, and Finn smiled at his mom and sister. He suddenly realized how much he'd needed this. Not after sitting at the healers for so long, but after all the hard things that had happened in the last months. The feeling of security with his family was something he didn't realize he'd needed. Despite all the bad things he and Adriana had gone through, Finn realized that these were the times that got them through. The little moments of sitting quietly as a family, reminiscing in the old days and the friends and family they'd lost. Simply spending time with one another. It was these thoughts that solidified something in Finn's mind. He loved his family. His hard-working, quirky, sarcastic dad that thought outside the box and cared about everyone he came into contact with. His strong-willed mom that didn't take no for an answer but had just the right words to say when something was troubling you. His compassionate, snooky and smart sister who somehow kept going when he'd probably have given up by now. And now, he realized once again, she was pregnant. What sort of person was going to join their family in less than a year? What personality would he or she have? Would he like to draw like his grandfather or throw axes like his grandmother? Would she be smooth and sarcastic like him, or snooky and energetic like Adriana? Only time would tell. But for the first time, Finn could feel hope rising, and dare he say, a little excitement. The next day, the village buzzed with excitement. Men gathered spare tools no longer needed and women collected things from around the house they no longer wanted. Finally, after a long time of waiting, Johan the trader was coming. Tarin herself was alight with excitement. She enjoyed Johan's visits as much as anyone else, but after almost a year of traveling, her little brother was finally coming home. The last few times the trader had visited, Alton had spent nearly all his free time glued to the man's side, soaking up the stories of travel and adventure and other cultures. He'd begged their parents to let him go with Johan, but they'd refused because of his age. Finally, the last time Johan had come to Burke and Alton's begging had grown insistent, they'd relented. Only they insisted he must wait until he was 14. Now, finally, he was coming home. The chief had received a letter that morning from Johan announcing their recent departure from an island west of Burke. Tarin steered clear of her parents while they cleared out some areas of the house, wishing to trade old furniture for something newer. After choosing a few things of her own to hopefully trade, she left her house and gazed longingly at the sea. No ship could be seen yet, but she knew it was only a matter of time. A clatter caught her attention and noticed Eric struggling with a few boxes stacked on top of one another. The smallest had fallen and sprayed its contents in a variety of directions. She jogged forward and bent to pick up the items, wincing when the sunlight glittered off Eric's prosthetic and caught her in the eye. "Thanks," Eric said gratefully when she stood back up, the small box in her arms. "Excited? You have no idea." Tarin grinned. "He's been gone so long." "Yeah, he has." Eric heaved the boxes in his arms a little higher, piquing her curiosity. "What are you going to trade?" "Oh, a whole bunch of stuff," Eric conceded. "There's a few GRDs in there, some old leather shop tools that I don't use, some riding gear. A few pairs of boots that I never really wore." He shrugged. "I'm hoping to make some money, more than actually trade." "Yeah." Tarin's eyes glittered. "Why is that?" Eric turned away, pretending not to understand. "Why is what?" "Eric Larson, don't play dumb." Tarin followed him down the street. She was ever so thankful she'd worn comfortable shoes and pants today. She could keep up with the boys and their longer gaits when she wore pants and well-worn leather boots. "There's a reason you want to make money rather than stock up on things." "What is it?" Eric gave her a long-suffering sigh. "I'm not sure I'm ready to talk about it yet." Tarin scoffed. "Why is that?" "Because technically I haven't talked to Hick." Eric broke off, his cheeks going red. Tarin giggled uncontrollably. "I knew it. You're trying to save money so you can provide for Ad." "Shush." Eric shushed her loudly, looking around nervously. "Don't be so loud. Like I said, I haven't even talked to Hiccup yet. And anyway, it's just financial preparation. It's not like I'm ready to propose or anything." "What are we proposing?" "Annie." Eric whipped around, very nearly knocking over his tower of boxed. Tarin struggled to keep her laughter inside. "Proposing? Who said anything about proposing?" He laughed awkwardly. Adriana's left eyebrow shot IP into her hairline and Tarin noticed Eric's struggle to come up with some excuse. Luckily she was good at making excuses. We're proposing a welcome home party for Alton. Yes. Eric grinned at her, and faced Adriana again, nodding vigorously. Yes. A fine proposal to have a welcome home party. Obviously. Obviously. Adriana's eyebrow hadn't lowered. Eric gulped. Yeah. How's Finn? Taryn asked. Adriana's face split into a smile and Eric shot Taryn another thankful smile. He's good. He still gets really tired very easily, but he's hoping to come see Johan in a while, probably when the first big rush slows down. Great. I'm glad he's doing better. Guys. Cliff suddenly pelted toward them around the corner and Taryn's heart did a somersault. Do you think Johan would trade a butterfly for a brooch? He screeched to a halt when he saw Taryn and very narrowly missed Eric and his tower of boxes. Taryn's heart was hammering in her chest. Cliff stared at her with wide eyes, almost as if he'd done something wrong. They hadn't spoken since the day he'd shown her his oasis and her father had forbidden them from speaking. She felt awful, avoiding him like this. She could tell how awkward it was for everyone, not just them. Eric and Adriana were sharing a sympathetic glance in her periphery. Eric broke the silence. I don't think Johan will find a butterfly in even exchange for a brooch. Besides, Adriana added, glancing at Taryn. If it's a brooch you're looking for, I'd suggest it as a gift for someone slightly older, like your mom. Oh. Cliff replied flat, still staring at Taryn. She couldn't take it anymore. Sorry, my mom wanted me to help clean out Alton's room since he's coming home. See you later. Taryn strode away as fast as she could without running. She knew she was good at coming up with excuses on the fly, but her friends knew her better than that. She couldn't hide her true emotions. She entered her house and closed the door behind her with a heavy sigh. She stared down at herself, wishing she could talk to Cliff. She didn't know what was between them, but she felt strangely empty without being able to talk to her friend. Cliff was her friend before she'd ever considered him as something more. This was affecting all of her friendships. Every one of her friends was one of Cliff's brothers and sisters. She couldn't avoid him without avoiding them too, which she didn't want to do. But she'd been given a strict order. She didn't know why her dad held so much distaste for Cliff, but she couldn't be a recluse forever. Even though she wanted to please her parents, she'd never asked for anything before. All she wanted was her friend back. Was that such a bad desire? Taryn. Are you all right? Her mother asked from across the room, pulling her out of her thoughts. Yes. Taryn lied. Suddenly the horn blew from the nearby docks, announcing the arrival of Johan's ship. Alton. Taryn flung the door nearly off its hinges and she ran to the docks, not waiting for her parents to give her permission. She didn't care, she didn't need permission to greet her brother home and she didn't need to hold their hands to the docks. She made it to the docks in mere minutes, feeling out of breath. It felt good to run for once. The ship was still out in the harbor, steadily coming closer. Taryn bounced on the balls of her feet, listening as the chief kept the crowds back for now to give Johan some time to breathe before opening up shop. At long last, the ship docked and Johan's familiar face appeared over the side. Arberg. My favorite island of all my travels. Johan, you say that to everyone you visit. Hiccup drawled, reaching up to shake the man's hand. Welcome back. Thank you, Master Hiccup. Johan smiled, cocking his head to the side. You know, sir, if you return to my ship in an hour's time, I might be able to find a tonic for graying hair. What? The chief's hands flew to his hair. Taryn snickered, waiting for her brother to emerge. Joking, sir, only joking. I might have to draw up a trade sanction law for that one, Johan. The crowd gasped but Hiccup waved his hands in a calming manner. Only kidding. A collective sigh swept across the docks, including a heavy one from Johan. Worst words a man of this occupation can hear, Hiccup. You see who has all the cards, then. Aha. Johan nodded resolutely. He looked around in confusion for a moment. I thought I told. He marched away suddenly, his voice echoing across the deck. Alton, tell me you haven't lost the ladder. No, I found it. Tarin's heart leaped as an auburn-haired teenager came to the edge of the ship, carrying a ladder. He heaved it over the edge with a strength she hadn't seen before and he grinned down at her. "Hey sis!" Alton exclaimed, hopping down from the ship onto the dock with ease. Tarin stared up at him. He was taller than her. He was no longer the little boy who left at an early 14. While he was still technically 14, his birthday was nearing, and apparently he'd had quite the growth spurt in his time away. She engulfed him in a tight hug and was shocked when he nearly lifted her off the ground. "Alton, I missed you so much." "You too, Ter." He set her back down, brown eyes glittering. His skin was tan from long days in the sun. "Just you wait to see all the stuff I brought for you and Mom. You're going to go insane. Travel was kind to you, Alton." Hiccup clapped the teenager on the shoulder. "You had to have grown 6 inches. 4.5, Alton replied sheepishly. "Alton." Their mother ran through the crowd and nearly tackled her son in a hug. "Oh my little boy. Hi Mom." Alton grinned up at his dad when he walked up to his family. "Hey Dad." Clyde blinked a few times in surprise before smiling. "Welcome home, son. Come along, then. I've just prepared lunch." Their mom tried to steer him away, but Alton paused. "I should help Johan." "Nonsense, boy." Johan waved a hand. "You've been talking about your family non-stop for the last 2 weeks. Go on and spend time with them. You can take over for me in a few hours." "All right then. Thanks." Alton quickly followed his parents up the ramp, accepting pats on the back from the line of people as he went. Tarin paused, looking up at Johan. "Thanks for bringing him back in one piece." "Of course my dear." Johan patted her shoulder. "He's a good lad, that one, just like his brother." Tarin's smile slipped for a short moment, but her interest lifted again when the man suddenly turned to Hiccup. "Oh Chief, best have a look at this. You'll be expecting visitors soon enough." "Visitors?" Hiccup asked, unrolling a piece of parchment Johan had given him. Tarin was very interested in this, but remembered she wasn't part of the Chief's council or Johan's trading business. Plus her family had already left. She eagerly bid them goodbye and ran after her family. Maybe she could convince Alton to tell her who else would be visiting Burke, and on such short notice. She caught up with her family just in time to see Inga tackle Alton into a hug. He spun her around once and set her back down. Alton's words were suddenly cut off when Inga rounded and punched him in the arm. "Ow. What, you never change, Jorgensen?" Alton whined. "You did." Inga gasped. "You're not a noodle anymore. Now you've actually got muscles." "Oh come on," Alton rolled his eyes. "Working on a ship will do that to a person, but I'm still weedy." "Whatever you say." Inga grinned, slapping his arm again. "I'm glad you're home. We have so much to talk about." Tarin and Alton's dad cleared his throat nearby. Inga rolled her eyes and gave him a sweet smile. "Later, obviously." Tarin stiffened, but thankfully her dad didn't respond to the sass. Probably because not many people could argue with a Jorgensen and win. "Seriously though, I'll catch you later, okay?" Inga jogged back to the healers and the Brand family hustled back to their house, Alton already launching into stories. Just before disappearing into the house, Tarin caught sight of a certain curly-haired boy watching from a few streets away. Tarin wanted to wave, to smile, to sow something to raise both their spirits. But then her name was called and just like the quiet, demure, obedient daughter she was, she slipped inside and shut the door. "Greetings, Chief Haddock of Burke. Please excuse our lack of formal greeting, but we felt the time was necessary to meet face to face. Trader Johan has kindly recommended we reach out to you, singling you out as the most level-headed of chieftains in the archipelago. We humbly request a peaceful meeting with you and your council about the future between our villages. A delegation of men will arrive at Burke forthwith. We will respectfully withdraw our men if you disapprove of our intrusion without prior request. Thank you for your time and I look forward to meeting you. Respectfully. Ivan Sullivan, Chief of Jut." A delegation. Apparently. Finn frowned down at the strange note before trotting after his dad, wincing at every pound of his feet against the wooden boards. Wait, when are they supposed to get here? Where exactly are they from? How many are coming? The questions flew out of his mouth without thinking. I'm not sure, Finn Hiccup replied calmly, striding up to Johann's ship. That's why I'm setting up a perimeter just in case. Where is this? Finn frowned at the paper once again. Hajat Island. Jut, Finn. Hiccup chuckled. Yacht, then. He rolled his eyes, frowning with displeasure. Whoever these people were, they had a very strange